A O'Brien Books production of We Took the Eagles. Chapter 1. The Dream and the Eagles. The night sky above the Shire blazed with bursts of colour, Gandalf's fireworks painting the darkness with fleeting moments of brilliance. Hobbits of all ages gathered in the field below, their faces upturned in wonder, laughter and exclamations of delight rising above the general hubbub of the party. Frodo Baggins sat atop a grassy knoll, slightly removed from the main festivities. His eyes reflected the sparkling display above, but his mind wandered far beyond the borders of the Shire. Beside him, Samwise Gamgee contentedly puffed on his pipe, while Peregrine Took, known as Pippin to his companions, sprawled on the cool grass, his usually animated face uncharacteristically pensive. "It's been 3 years," Frodo mused, his voice barely audible above the distant revelry. 3 years since we returned." Sam nodded, exhaling a perfect smoke ring. "Aye, Mr. Frodo. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and other times, well, it's as if it all happened in another life." Pippin sat up abruptly, his brow furrowed. "I had the strangest dream last night," he said, his voice tinged with confusion. "There was an Ent, tall as the trees in Fangorn, ancient as the earth itself. And do you know what it asked me?" Frodo and Sam turned to him, curiosity piqued. "What did it ask, Pip?" Frodo prompted. "It asked why we hadn't just taken the Eagles to Mordor," Pippin said, his eyes wide with remembered bewilderment. "I woke up right after, but it stuck in my head, Frodo. Why didn't we just fly there? Seems it would have been a right sight easier, don't you think?" Frodo's breath caught in his throat. The question, so innocently posed, opened a floodgate of memories and what-ifs. His mind raced through the long, perilous journey they had undertaken, the close calls, the battles, the losses. How different might it all have been if they had indeed taken the Eagles? I don't know, Pippin," Frodo admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Perhaps it wasn't meant to be that simple." Sam cleared his throat, a hint of defensiveness in his tone. "Now, Mr. Pippin, it don't do no good to question what's past. We did what needed doing, and that's that." But Frodo was lost in thought, barely hearing Sam's words. His mind conjured images of soaring over the lands of Middle-earth, bypassing the treacherous paths they had been forced to tread. No Mines of Moria, no betrayal at Amon Hen, no trek through the Dead Marshes. A particularly loud burst from a firework startled Frodo from his reverie. He blinked, focusing once more on the present, on the joyous celebration around him. Yet, as the night wore on and he bid farewell to his friends, Pippin's question lingered in his mind like a persistent echo. Back in Bag End, Frodo prepared for bed, his thoughts still swirling with alternatives to their perilous journey. As sleep claimed him, he found himself in a dream unlike any he had experienced before. He stood in a vast, misty forest, ancient trees towering around him. Before him, an Ent materialized, its bark-like skin etched with the wisdom of countless ages. "Frodo Baggins," the Ent's voice rumbled like distant thunder, "would you take the journey again, this time astride the great eagles?" Frodo's heart raced. This was too similar to Pippin's dream, too real to be mere coincidence. "Absolutely not," he exclaimed, shaking his head vehemently. "We all know Sam was the true hero of the story. Surely Sam would be better suited for this task." The Ent, however, seemed to ignore Frodo's protests. Its ancient eyes gleamed with an otherworldly light as it declared, "So be it. The journey shall commence." With a wave of its gnarled, branch-like arm, the dreamscape began to shift and swirl around them. "Wait!" Frodo cried out, but his voice was lost in the maelstrom of swirling mist and fragmenting reality. The Ent's voice echoed through the chaos. "Flying with eagles will present its own challenges. The journey will not be without peril. You must—" But before the Ent could finish its warning, Frodo's eyes snapped open. He found himself back in his bed at Bag End, his heart pounding, a sheen of cold sweat on his brow. But something was different. The room seemed younger, somehow, and looming over his bed was a familiar figure, one he hadn't seen in years. "Gandalf?" Frodo gasped, his voice a mixture of confusion and disbelief. Gandalf's expression grew grave, his bushy eyebrows furrowing. "Frodo, my lad," he said, his voice low and urgent, "the ring. Do you have it?" Frodo's hand instinctively moved to his pocket, his fingers brushing against the cool metal band. A jolt of shock ran through him, his eyes widening in disbelief. How could it be there? He had seen it destroyed, had felt the weight of it leave him forever in the fires of Mount Doom. Yet here it was, as if it had never left. With trembling hands, Frodo pulled the ring out, staring at it with a mixture of fear, wonder, and revulsion. The gold gleamed innocently in the dim light, betraying nothing of its true nature or the turmoil it caused in Frodo's heart. A wave of nausea washed over him as memories flooded back. The constant temptation, the growing burden, the way it had nearly consumed him at the end. "No!" he whispered, his voice hoarse with emotion. "It can't be. Not again." For a moment, he considered flinging the ring away, or lying to Gandalf, saying he had lost it, anything to avoid the burden he knew it would bring. But as he met Gandalf's piercing gaze, he knew there was no escaping his fate. The weight of responsibility settled on his shoulders once more, as heavy and oppressive as it had been in his memories, or were they visions of a future yet to come? "Yes," Frodo replied reluctantly, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's here." The weight of the ring seemed to increase as he acknowledged its presence, as if it knew its journey was about to begin anew. Frodo's fingers closed around it, a gesture both protective and fearful. He could already feel its insidious influence trying to seep into his mind, and he steeled himself against it, drawing on strength he wasn't sure he still possessed. Gandalf nodded solemnly. "Guard it well, Frodo. The fate of Middle-earth depends on it." The wizard's words hung heavy in the air, a reminder of the enormous responsibility that once again rested on Frodo's shoulders. "We must act quickly. There's no time to waste." Frodo sat up abruptly, his mind reeling. This couldn't be happening. This wasn't real. He had already completed the quest, already destroyed the ring, hadn't he? What day is it?" he stammered, looking around wildly, Gandalf's brow furrowed with concern. "It is the day we planned, Frodo. The day you must leave the Shire and begin your journey." Frodo's world tilted on its axis. Somehow, impossibly, he had been returned to the beginning, the weight of memory, of a journey not yet taken, of hardships not yet endured, crashed down upon him. "No," he whispered, then louder. "No, I can't go. I won't go." He tried to explain, words tumbling out in a frantic rush. "Gandalf, you don't understand. I've already taken the ring to Mordor. I've already completed this quest." The wizard's expression shifted from concern to alarm. "Frodo, what are you talking about? You haven't left the Shire." "But I have," Frodo insisted, growing more agitated by the moment. "I've lived through it all. The Council of Elrond, the mines of Moria, Lothlorien, all of it. We destroyed the ring, Gandalf. Sauron was defeated." Gandalf placed a comforting hand on Frodo's shoulder, his voice gentle but firm. "My dear hobbit, you must have had a very vivid dream. But I assure you, none of that has happened yet, and it is precisely why you must go now. You are the only one who can do this, Frodo. The fate of Middle-earth rests in your hands." Frodo shook his head, tears welling in his eyes. How could he make Gandalf understand? How could he convey the weight of experiences not yet lived, of suffering not yet endured? A noise from outside caught their attention. Sam's voice drifted through the window, humming a garden tune. The rhythmic sound of a trowel hitting soil accompanied his melody, though Frodo knew his faithful friend was merely keeping up appearances, ready to spring into action at a moment's notice. Without warning, Gandalf strode to the window and, with surprising agility for one his age, reached out and pulled Sam into the room. "Samwise Gamgee," Gandalf said, his eyes twinkling despite the gravity of the situation. "I believe your master could use some encouragement." Sam, looking bewildered but determined, turned to Frodo. "Mr. Frodo," he said, his loyalty shining in his eyes, "I don't rightly know what's troubling you, but I want you to know. I'll go with you. Wherever you need to go, whatever you need to do, I'll be right there beside you." Frodo felt a lump form in his throat. Dear, faithful Sam, always there, always ready to support him. But how could he drag Sam into this nightmare again? "I can't, Sam," Frodo said, his voice breaking. "I can't do it again. The pain, the suffering, it's too much." Gandalf and Sam exchanged worried glances. Then something seemed to shift in Gandalf's demeanor. He straightened, a new resolve evident in his bearing. "There might be another way," he said slowly, as if the idea was just forming. "A way that could make the journey different." He turned to Frodo, his eyes intense. "Frodo, what if I told you we could take the eagles?" Frodo's heart skipped a beat. The eagles, just like in the dreams. Was this the purpose of it all, to change the course of their quest? Before he could respond, Gandalf was moving, striding purposefully out of the room. "Come," he called over his shoulder. "Both of you." In a daze, Frodo found himself following Gandalf out of Bag End, Sam close behind. The cool night air hit his face, grounding him somewhat in this surreal situation. In the distance, he could see Pippin and Merry, their arms full of what looked suspiciously like purloined fireworks. Gandalf raised his staff, and for a moment Frodo thought he might summon more fireworks. But instead, the wizard began to chant in a language Frodo didn't recognize. The air seemed to thicken, to vibrate with unseen energy. "Gandalf," Frodo whispered, a mix of awe and confusion in his voice, I thought you couldn't simply summon the eagles at will." The wizard paused in his incantation, a wry smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Ah, Frodo, there is much about the ways of wizards and eagles that remains mysterious, even to me. Let us say that in this unique circumstance, I am invoking an ancient promise. The eagles are proud and independent beings, not to be summoned lightly. But the fate of Middle-earth hangs in the balance, and the gravity of our situation demands uncommon steps." With that cryptic explanation, Gandalf resumed his chanting, the words seeming to echo across the night sky. Frodo couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted, that they were deviating from a path once set in stone, and then they waited. The silence stretched, broken only by the faint rustling of leaves in the night breeze. Frodo's heart pounded in his chest, a mix of anticipation and dread coursing through him. Then, with a rush of wind that nearly knocked them off their feet, they came. The great eagles, majestic and awe-inspiring, descended from the sky, their massive wings stirring the air into miniature whirlwinds. Gandalf stepped forward, addressing the largest of the eagles. In hushed tones, he explained the gravity of their situation, the importance of their quest. As the wizard finished speaking, the eagle's piercing gaze swept over the assembled group, lingering on Frodo. "We have long watched the struggles of Middle-earth from afar," the eagle's voice boomed, causing Sam to jump. "Now you ask us to intervene directly. Tell me, Ringbearer, why should we carry you to Mordor? Why take this path when the journey itself may be as important as its end?" Frodo felt the weight of the eagle's question settle upon him, as heavy as the ring itself. It echoed the doubts in his own heart, the lingering uncertainty about this new course they were setting. He realized that this question, why take the eagles, and what might be lost in doing so, would be one they'd have to answer not just with words, but with the choices they made along the way. I'm not certain, Frodo admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. He glanced at his companions, then back to the eagle, his eyes filled with a mix of fear and confusion. It's all happening so fast. Just moments ago I thought our quest was over, and now— He trailed off, shaking his head. After a pause he continued, "But the fate of Middle-earth hangs in the balance, and I fear what might happen if we don't at least try. Perhaps this path holds a hope we haven't yet seen, even if I don't fully understand it myself. I only wish we had more time to consider it all." The eagle regarded him silently for a long moment, then nodded its regal head. "Very well. We will help you on this quest, and perhaps together we will discover the answer to this question." Pippin and Merry, drawn by the commotion, ran with their fireworks and now stood slack-jawed at the edge of the gathering. Gandalf quickly brought them up to speed, and to Frodo's amazement they immediately volunteered to join the quest. "We're coming too," Merry declared, with Pippin nodding vigorously beside him. "We shall not be left behind in this quest." Merry and Pippin exchanged glances, a mix of excitement and trepidation in their eyes. This was all happening so fast, so unexpectedly. "Eagles," Pippin whispered, his voice filled with awe. "Can you believe it, Merry? We're going to fly." Merry nodded, but his expression was more thoughtful. "It's not just about the flying, Pip. This is a real adventure, like in Bilbo's stories. We're actually going to leave the Shire." "But isn't it dangerous?" Pippin asked, his brow furrowing. "I mean, Mordor, that's where all the scary tales come from." "I suppose it is," Merry admitted, his voice low. "I'm excited, Pip, but I'd be lying if I said I wasn't scared too. We've no idea what's waiting for us out there." Pippin fell silent for a moment, considering his cousin's words. Then he squared his shoulders, a determined glint in his eye. "Well, danger or not, we can't let Frodo go alone, and just think of the stories we'll have to tell when we get back." Merry smiled, clapping Pippin on the shoulder. "You're right, Pip. Whatever comes, we'll face it as we always have. Together." As they turned back to the group, both hobbits felt a strange mix of emotions: the thrill of an unexpected adventure, the comfort of familiar companionship, and the nagging sense that they were stepping into something far bigger than they could imagine. The Shire suddenly seemed very small and far away. But Frodo still hesitated. The memory of his previous journey, or was it a prophetic vision, weighed heavily upon him. The pain, the fear, the constant danger, could he willingly step into that again, even with the promise of an easier path? As if sensing his turmoil, the world around Frodo began to fade. The concerned faces of his friends blurred, and suddenly he was face to face with the Ent from his dreams once more. "It is your destiny, Frodo Baggins," the Ent's voice resonated through him. "There has been a debate raging in the annals of lore as to why you didn't take the eagles, and it must be discovered." Frodo felt dizzy, overwhelmed. "But why?" he managed to ask. "Why does it matter?" The Ent's eyes seemed to hold the wisdom of ages as it replied, "This journey goes beyond Middle-earth, young hobbit. For ages, across realms and realities, a question has lingered in the minds of those who know your tale. The entire world, and worlds beyond worlds, need to know the truth. You alone can shine a light on this question that has haunted the realms of storytelling and imagination." Frodo's mind reeled, struggling to comprehend. "You mean, this isn't just about saving Middle-earth? There are other worlds watching us?" "Indeed," the Ent confirmed, its voice resonating with the weight of cosmic significance. "Your journey will ripple across realities, answering a question that has puzzled countless minds. Will you take up this cause again, Frodo?" Will you save not only Middle-earth, but also free these myriad worlds from their darkness of uncertainty?" The enormity of the choice before him made Frodo's head spin, but as he looked into the Ent's ancient eyes, he felt a resolve solidifying within him. This was bigger than him, bigger than his fears and doubts. With a gasp, Frodo found himself back in the present, his friends and the eagles watching him with concern. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. "I will go," he said, his voice stronger than he felt. A collective sigh of relief went through the group. Gandalf's eyes twinkled with pride and something else. Was it understanding? Had he known all along the true nature of this quest? There was no time to ponder. With surprising strength, Gandalf lifted each hobbit onto the backs of the waiting eagles. As Frodo settled between the eagle's wings, he felt the weight of the ring around his neck more acutely than ever. With trembling hands he withdrew it, its golden surface gleaming innocently in the starlight. For a moment he hesitated. Then, drawing a deep breath, he pulled a fine chain from his vest, a gift from Bilbo long ago, and threaded the ring onto it. "What are you doing, Mr. Frodo?" Sam asked, his voice laced with concern. Frodo replied softly, fastening the chain around his neck. "I'm not sure, Sam. It feels safer this way somehow." The ring settled against his chest, a constant reminder of the monumental task ahead. As they prepared to take flight, Gandalf's voice rose above the beating of wings. "Remember, the enemy is cunning and powerful. Trust in each other and in the strength within yourselves, and above all—" But his final words of advice were cut short by a chilling sound. From the distance came the unmistakable clamor of approaching danger, harsh cries, and the clank of armor. "Hurry!" Gandalf shouted, urgency clear in his voice. "You must go now!" With a great rush of wind, the eagles spread their wings and launched into the sky. Frodo's stomach lurched as the ground fell away beneath them. The last thing he saw as they soared into the night was Gandalf's figure, standing tall and defiant, his staff raised against the encroaching darkness. As the Shire disappeared beneath a blanket of clouds, Frodo clung tightly to his eagle's feathers. This journey, he realized, would be unlike anything he had experienced before, in reality or in dreams. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever truths were waiting to be uncovered, he knew one thing for certain: nothing would ever be the same again. The quest to answer the great eagle question had begun. As they soared higher into the night sky, the initial rush of adrenaline began to subside, allowing the reality of their situation to sink in. Frodo glanced around at his companions, each lost in their own thoughts as they clung to their feathered mounts. Sam's face was a mixture of wonder and terror as he gazed at the rapidly shrinking landscape below. Merry and Pippin, despite their earlier bravado, now looked pale and uncertain in the moonlight. The enormity of their undertaking was finally dawning on them all. Frodo felt a sudden pang of guilt. He had dragged them into this, knowingly or not. They had no idea of the dangers that lay ahead, the trials they would face, and yet here they were, loyal to the last, embarking on a journey that would change them forever. "Are you all right, Mr. Frodo?" Sam's concerned voice cut through his thoughts. Frodo managed a weak smile. "Yes, Sam, merely absorbing the vastness of it all." As if sensing their need for reassurance, the eagle carrying Frodo spoke, its voice somehow audible despite the rushing wind. "Fear not, little ones. Though the path ahead is fraught with danger, you do not face it alone. The skies are our domain, and we shall guard you as best we can." These words, though comforting, served as a stark reminder of the perilous quest that lay before them. Frodo's hand instinctively moved to the ring hanging around his neck. Its weight seemed to increase with each passing moment, a constant reminder of the burden he carried. As the first light of dawn began to paint the eastern sky, Frodo allowed himself one last look back towards the Shire. It was already lost from view. hidden behind a veil of clouds and distance. He wondered, with a heavy heart, if he would ever see those green hills again. Turning his gaze forward, towards the unknown horizons that awaited them, Frodo steeled himself for what was to come. The great eagle question may have set them on this path, but he knew that answering it would require more than just a change in their mode of travel. It would demand courage, sacrifice, and a strength he wasn't sure he possessed. With a deep breath, Frodo settled in for the long flight ahead. The quest had begun, and there was no turning back now. As the eagles bore them aloft, the hobbits gazed in wonder at the Shire unfolding beneath them. The party field dwindled to a mere patch of trampled grass, the lingering sparks of Gandalf's fireworks now tiny pinpricks of light in the vast darkness. The familiar hills and valleys of Hobbiton took on a new aspect from above, like a child's toy landscape crafted of moss and stone. The Brandywine River gleamed silver in the moonlight, a ribbon of light snaking through the shadowed countryside. Beyond it, the hobbits could just make out the dark smudge of the old forest, its ancient trees a deeper black against the night sky. As they flew on, the neatly tended fields and meadows of the Shire gave way to wilder lands. The Barrow Downs loomed to the south, their rounded hills cloaked in mist, while to the east, the first hints of the Weather Hills rose against the horizon. Frodo, despite the weight of his burden, found himself awestruck by the beauty of his homeland, seen from this new perspective. Never before had he truly grasped the vastness of even this small corner of Middle-earth. It filled him with a sense of wonder, but also with a deep sadness, knowing that all of this was under threat from the shadow in the east. As the first rays of dawn painted the eastern sky in hues of pink and gold, as the eagles soared high above the sleeping world, Frodo allowed himself one last look back towards the heart of the Shire. It was already lost from view, hidden behind a veil of clouds and distance. He wondered, with a heavy heart, if he would ever see those green hills again. Chapter 2. Perils of the Sky. As the eagles bore them eastward, the landscape below transformed with the rising sun. The shadowy patchwork of fields and forests that had been the Shire gave way to wilder terrains, bathed in the golden light of dawn. Frodo, still grappling with the surreal nature of their situation, clung tightly to the eagle's feathers. The cool morning air rushed past his face, carrying away the last vestiges of sleepiness and replacing them with a growing sense of exhilaration. Beside him, Sam's eyes were wide with wonder, his usual earthbound sensibilities momentarily forgotten as he gazed at the landscape unfurling beneath them. Merry and Pippin, riding together on a particularly large eagle, could scarcely conceal their joy as they pointed out landmarks and marveled at the bird's-eye view of their beloved Shire. "Look, Merry!" Pippin exclaimed, his voice barely audible over the rush of wind. "You can see all the way to the old forest from up here." Merry nodded, his face a mixture of awe and trepidation. "Aye, and beyond. I never thought I'd see the world like this, Pip. It's a sight beyond imagining." Frodo, hearing their exchange, felt a pang of nostalgia for their innocence. How quickly that innocence had been stripped away in his previous journey. Or was it a dream? The lines between reality and vision blurred in his mind, making him dizzy for a moment. "Are you all right, Mr. Frodo?" Sam's concerned voice cut through his reverie. Frodo managed a small smile. "Yes, Sam, just taking it all in." Frodo's mind whirled with conflicting thoughts. His memories of the previous journey felt both vivid and dreamlike, blurring the lines between what he knew and what he was experiencing anew. This aerial path to Mordor, while serving the same ultimate purpose, would be filled with new challenges. He realized he couldn't rely solely on his past experiences to navigate this journey. Frodo found himself needing to stay alert, ready for whatever this altered quest might bring. As the morning wore on, the initial fear of their lofty position gave way to a sense of freedom. The hobbits found themselves relaxing, marveling at the patchwork of fields and forests below, tracing the silver threads of rivers as they wound their way through the landscape. Frodo's mind wandered to the ring, hanging heavily around his neck on its fine chain. Even here, miles above the ground, he could feel its weight, its constant pull. He wondered if the eagles could sense it too, if they understood the true gravity of their mission. As they journeyed ever eastward, the land beneath them began to change in subtle yet disquieting ways. The lush forests and verdant plains gave way to sparser, more twisted growths. Trees became scarce, their forms gnarled and leafless, reaching towards the sky like pleading hands. The grass, once green and vibrant, now took on a sickly yellow hue, as if the very life was being leached from the earth. The air, too, underwent a transformation. The crisp, clean breeze that had initially invigorated the travellers now carried a faint, acrid tang, reminiscent of ash and decay. Frodo found himself breathing shallowly, his lungs protesting against the tainted air. Even the eagles, mighty as they were, seemed to labour more heavily in their flight, their wings beating with greater effort against the thickening atmosphere. Colours began to fade from the world around them, as if a great artist had washed his brush over the landscape, muting all but the most sombre of hues. The sky, once a brilliant blue, now bore a perpetual greyish cast, and the sun's light seemed wan and sickly, unable to penetrate fully the pall that hung over the land. In the distance, beyond the brown lands and the southern eaves of Mirkwood, a deeper darkness loomed. It was as if a great shadow had been cast upon the earth, a void that swallowed all light and hope. Mordor. Though still far off, its presence weighed heavily upon the company, a constant reminder of the peril towards which they flew. Frodo felt the ring grow heavier with each league they crossed, its malevolent influence seeming to resonate with the corrupted lands below. He glanced at his companions, seeing in their eyes a mix of determination and growing unease. They were crossing into lands touched by Sauron's power, and every instinct warned them of the danger ahead. "Mr. Frodo," Sam's voice broke through his thoughts once more. "Do you reckon we'll be able to see all the way to Mordor from up here?" Frodo shook his head. "I don't think so, Sam. Mordor is still far to the east, beyond many lands and mountains." "It's a shame," Pippin chimed in from his perch. "If we could see it, we'd know exactly where to go. Why, we'd be able to see right where we're going, plain as anything." Merry chuckled. "I don't think getting lost is our biggest worry, Pip. It's what might find us that concerns me." As if on cue, it was Pippin who first noticed the dark shapes on the horizon. "What are those?" he called out, pointing ahead. Frodo squinted against the glare of the sun. At first, he thought they might be clouds, but as they drew nearer, he realized with a start that they were moving, and moving fast. The lead eagle let out a piercing cry that sent shivers down Frodo's spine. "Hold tight, little ones," it commanded. "We have company." As the shapes grew closer, Frodo's heart sank. They were birds, enormous birds with wingspans to rival the eagles themselves. But unlike the noble creatures carrying the hobbits, these birds had a menacing air about them. Their feathers were dark as night, their beaks curved and sharp like cruel hooks. "Great Goshawks," the eagle beneath Frodo growled. "Fell creatures, corrupted by dark forces. They hunt anything that dares enter their territory." Frodo's mind raced. This was new. Nothing like this had happened in his previous journey. Was this the price of taking the eagles? New dangers he couldn't have foreseen? "What do we do?" Sam asked, his voice tight with fear. Before Frodo could respond, the lead eagle's voice rang out. "We fight, little ones. Cling fast and place your faith in our wings." There was no time for further reflection. With a bone-chilling screech, the lead goshawk dove towards them, its talons extended. "Brace yourselves!" Frodo's eagle cried out, banking hard to the right. The sudden movement nearly dislodged Frodo from his perch. He clung desperately to the eagle's feathers, his heart pounding in his chest. Around him he could hear the startled cries of his friends as their own mounts took evasive action. The sky erupted into chaos. Eagles and goshawks clashed in a flurry of feathers and talons. The hobbits, unused to aerial combat, could do little but hold on for dear life as their mounts twisted and turned, climbed and dove in a deadly aerial dance. Frodo's eagle was locked in combat with a particularly large goshawk. As they grappled mid-air, Frodo found himself perilously close to the enemy bird's snapping beak. He could see the malice in its red eyes, feel the heat of its breath. The goshawk's beak snapped mere inches from Frodo's face, the rush of air from its movement ruffling his hair. He recoiled, pressing himself flat against his eagle's back, feeling every muscle tense beneath him as his mount battled the larger predator. The acrid scent of the goshawk's breath filled his nostrils, a mixture of decay and something alien that made his stomach churn. Frodo's fingers ached as he gripped the eagle's feathers tighter, his knuckles white with the effort. The world spun around him in a dizzying blur of blue sky and dark feathers. His heart hammered against his ribs, each beat a reminder of how precarious his position was. A deafening screech pierced the air as the goshawk's talons raked across his eagle's flank. Frodo felt his mount shudder beneath him, heard its pained cry. For a moment they plummeted, and Frodo's stomach lurched into his throat. Then, with a mighty beat of its wings, his eagle regained control, but Frodo could feel the strain in its movements. "Sam!" he cried out, searching frantically for his friend amidst the melee. "I'm here, Mr. Frodo!" Sam's voice came from somewhere to his left. "Hold fast!" The advice was easier said than done, as Frodo's eagle executed a particularly daring maneuver, rolling to avoid the goshawk's slashing talons. Frodo felt his grip slipping. Time seemed to slow as he lost his hold, the wind rushing past him as he began to fall. Panic gripped him. This was it. After everything he'd been through, he was going to fall to his death before even reaching Mordor. The irony might have been amusing if it wasn't so terrifying. But then, miraculously, he felt something grab the back of his cloak. He looked up to see Sam, leaning precariously from his own eagle, his face a mask of determination as he held on to Frodo for dear life. "I've got you, Mr. Frodo," Sam grunted, straining with the effort. "Just hold on!" With a mighty effort, Sam's eagle maneuvered closer, allowing Frodo to scramble back onto his own mount. As soon as he was secure, both eagles dove, putting some distance between themselves and the marauding goshawks. "Thank you, Sam," Frodo gasped, his heart still racing. "You saved my life." Sam, looking a bit pale himself, managed a shaky smile. "I couldn't let you fall, Mr. Frodo. We're in this together, ain't we?" As they regained their bearings, Frodo realized that the battle was turning in their favor. The eagles, despite being outnumbered, were proving to be superior fighters. Their experience and intelligence gave them an edge over the more brutish goshawks. Merry and Pippin's eagle had just dispatched a goshawk with a clever feint, sending the dark bird spiraling towards the ground far below. The remaining goshawks, seeming to sense that the tide had turned, began to retreat, their screeches of frustration echoing across the sky. As the last of the goshawks disappeared into the distance, Frodo became aware of a change in his eagle's flight. The powerful wingbeats that had seemed so effortless before now came with a slight tremor, and their altitude wasn't quite as lofty as it had been. Glancing around, he noticed the other eagles showed similar signs of strain. Their noble heads, usually held high and proud, now dipped slightly between wingbeats. The battle, though victorious, had clearly taken its toll on their majestic allies. "Are you all right?" Frodo asked his mount softly, concern evident in his voice. The eagle gave a small nod, its breath coming in slightly labored pants. "Fear not, little one. We are strong, but even we have our limits. This skirmish has tested us more than we anticipated." Frodo felt a pang of worry. He had assumed the eagle's endurance was limitless, but now he realized they too could tire. This journey, he understood, would challenge them all in ways he hadn't foreseen. As the day wore on, the eagles pressed forward, their flight noticeably slower and lower than before. The landscape beneath them gradually changed, lush forests giving way to rugged hills and then to barren, rocky terrain. The hobbits, still shaken from the battle, spoke little, each lost in their own thoughts as they clung to their mounts. The sun's journey across the sky seemed to mirror their own, its bright optimism of dawn now fading into the weariness of late afternoon. Long shadows stretched across the land, and a chill wind began to rise, carrying with it the first hints of evening. "We must rest," the lead eagle finally announced, its voice tinged with exhaustion. "That battle has taken more out of us than we anticipated." Frodo nodded, a deeper understanding dawning on him. Of course, the eagles weren't tireless machines. They had limitations, just like any living creature. This journey wouldn't be as simple as flying straight to Mount Doom after all. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, the eagles began their descent towards a tall, craggy mountain peak. Frodo could see a relatively flat area near the summit. Not comfortable by Hobbit standards, certainly, but it would have to do. The landing was rougher than their takeoff had been, the eagles' fatigue evident in their less than graceful touchdown. As soon as they were on solid ground, the hobbits slid off their mounts, their legs wobbly from the long hours of flight. "We will rest here for the night," the lead eagle announced. "We must recover our strength before we can continue." Frodo nodded, looking around at their makeshift campsite. The peak was barren and windswept, offering little in the way of comfort or shelter, but at least they were safe for the moment. As the hobbits began to set up camp, gathering what meagre supplies they had brought with them, Frodo found himself drawn to the edge of the cliff. From this vantage point, he could see for miles in every direction. The world looked so vast, so full of unknown dangers. "What's troubling you, Mr. Frodo?" Sam's voice came from behind him, gentle with concern. Frodo turned to see his faithful friend approaching, a concerned look on his face. "I was just thinking, Sam," Frodo said softly, "about how different this journey is from what I remember." Sam nodded, though Frodo could see the confusion in his eyes. Sam, like the others, didn't share Frodo's memories or visions of their previous quest. "It's all new to me, Mr. Frodo," Sam admitted, "flying on eagles, fighting giant birds. It's not exactly what I imagined when I promised to stick with you." Frodo couldn't help but smile at that. "No, I suppose it isn't. But I'm glad you're here, Sam. I couldn't do this without you." As night fell, the hobbits gathered around a small fire, sharing what food they had and trying to warm themselves against the chill mountain air. Merry and Pippin, their earlier excitement somewhat dampened by the day's events, huddled close together, whispering amongst themselves. "Do you think it'll be like this the whole way?" Pippin asked, his voice carrying to where Frodo sat. Merry shrugged. "I don't know, Pip. But we knew it wouldn't be easy, didn't we? At least we're all together." Frodo felt a pang of guilt at their words. He had brought them into this, again, but this time the path was unknown even to him. What other dangers awaited them on this aerial journey to Mordor? As if sensing his thoughts, the lead eagle approached their small gathering. "Rest well, little ones," it said, its voice surprisingly gentle. "Tomorrow we fly over lands that grow ever darker. We must be prepared for whatever may come." With those ominous words hanging in the air, the eagle returned to its fellows, leaving the hobbits to their thoughts. As the night deepened, Frodo found himself unable to sleep. He sat up, watching the embers of their small fire slowly die out. The ring felt heavier than ever around his neck, its presence a constant reminder of the weight of their quest. "Can't sleep either, Mr. Frodo." Sam's whisper came from nearby. Frodo shook his head. "Too much on my mind, I suppose." Sam sat up, his face barely visible in the dim starlight. "Do you want to talk about it?" For a moment, Frodo was tempted to unburden himself, to tell Sam everything about his memories, or were they visions, of their previous journey. But he held back, not wanting to burden his friend with knowledge of a future that might never come to pass. Instead, he said, "I'm just worried about what lies ahead, Sam. We've barely begun our journey, and already we've faced such danger." Sam was quiet for a moment, then said, "My old gaffer always used to say, 'The task unbegun is the one most delayed in completion.' We've started, Mr. Frodo. That's something, isn't it?" Frodo smiled in the darkness. "Your gaffer is a wise hobbit, Sam." They sat in companionable silence for a while, listening to the wind whistling around the mountain peak and the soft breathing of their sleeping companions. "Sam," Frodo said at last, "do you ever wonder, if we're doing the right thing, taking this path?" Sam considered the question carefully before answering. "I reckon, Mr. Frodo, that the right path isn't always the easiest one. But if it's the one that needs taking, well, then we've got to see it through, haven't we?" Frodo nodded, feeling a surge of gratitude for his friend's simple wisdom. "You're right, of course. Thank you, Sam." As the night wore on, Frodo finally felt sleep beginning to claim him. He lay back, staring up at the unfamiliar stars. The quest to destroy the ring had always been daunting, but now it seemed even more so. They were literally flying into the unknown, facing dangers he couldn't have imagined. And yet, as he listened to the steady breathing of his friends around him, Frodo felt a glimmer of hope. They had faced their first challenge and emerged victorious. Perhaps, with the eagle's help and the strength of their fellowship, they could indeed succeed in this new, uncharted path to Mordor. As sleep finally began to claim him, Frodo's last thoughts were of the Ent from his dreams. "We seek to answer your riddle. May our efforts prove worthy of the task," he thought hazily. "I hope it's worth it." With the first light of dawn, they would take to the skies once more, flying ever closer to the dark lands of Mordor. What challenges awaited them, Frodo could only guess. But for now, under the watchful eyes of the great eagles, they rested, gathering strength for the trials that lay ahead. As the new day broke, Frodo awoke to find the eagles already stirring. Their noble heads were turned to the east, where the sky was tinged with an ominous red glow. "The shadow grows," the lead eagle said gravely. "We must make haste." As dawn broke, the hobbits faced their first challenge of the day, mounting their majestic avian steeds. Without Gandalf's assistance, the task seemed daunting. The eagles, sensing their rider's predicament, positioned themselves near a cluster of tall rocks jutting out from the mountainside. "Well," Merry said, eyeing the distance between the rocks and the eagles' backs, "well, looks like we'll need to screw up our courage for this jump." One by one, they scrambled up the craggy surface. Frodo went first, his heart pounding as he stood at the edge, the ring a leaden weight around his neck. With a deep breath, he jumped, landing somewhat ungracefully but safely on his eagle's back. Sam followed, his face a mixture of determination and terror as he made the leap. Merry and Pippin, emboldened by their friend's success, turned their jumps into a competition, each trying to land more elegantly than the other. As the hobbits prepared for another day of flight, Frodo couldn't shake the feeling that their journey was about to become even more perilous. But as he looked at the determined faces of his friends and felt the reassuring presence of the eagles, he knew that whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. With a great beating of wings, they took to the skies once more, soaring towards the rising sun and the dangers that awaited them in the east. The quest to answer the great eagle question continued, leading them into a future fraught with both peril and possibility. Chapter 3. The Storm of Shadows. As the eagles soared eastward, the landscape below gradually changed. The lush green fields of the west gave way to more rugged terrain, and an oppressive darkness seemed to creep across the land. Frodo, his eyes fixed on the horizon, felt a familiar dread settling in his heart. "Mr. Frodo," Sam's voice came from nearby, tinged with concern. "Does the sky look strange to you?" Frodo nodded grimly. Ahead of them, dark clouds were gathering with unnatural speed, roiling and churning like a cauldron of darkness, seething and roiling. Flashes of lightning illuminated the mass from within, revealing glimpses of its true enormity. "That's no natural storm," Merry called out, his voice barely audible over the increasing wind. "The very air seems to have become our foe." The lead eagle let out a piercing cry, drawing the attention of its kin. "Prepare yourselves, little ones," it warned. "We fly into darkness crafted by fell hands." As they approached the storm front, Frodo felt the ring grow heavier like an anvil around his neck. Its sinister power seemed to pulse in time with the flashes of lightning ahead. He grasped at his waistcoat, battling the urge to reach for the ring beneath. "Hold fast!" the eagles cried in unison as they plunged into the roiling mass of clouds. In an instant, the world around them transformed. Gone was the clear sky and the comforting sight of the earth below. They were engulfed in a maelstrom of wind and shadow, punctuated by blinding flashes of lightning and deafening cracks of thunder. Frodo clung desperately to his eagle's feathers, his eyes squeezed shut against the onslaught. The wind howled in his ears, drowning out all other sounds. He tried to call out to his companions, but his voice was torn away by the gale. The storm beat down upon them with relentless fury. The eagles, majestic and powerful as they were, found themselves tossed about like leaves in a hurricane. Their wings, usually so adept at navigating the skies, now struggled against winds that seemed to come from all directions at once. Lightning crackled around them, so close that Frodo could feel the heat singe his skin. The thunder that followed was not just heard, but felt, reverberating through his chest with bone-shaking force. The noise was deafening, causing pain that made Frodo wish he could cover his ears. If only he dared loosen his grip. As they were buffeted by the storm, Frodo's mind drifted to memories of his previous journey. He recalled the freezing storm they had faced on Caradhras, how they had found refuge in the mines of Moria. A bitter laugh escaped his lips, lost immediately to the howling wind. There was no mountain to shelter them now, no cave to crawl into. They were exposed, vulnerable, with nothing but the storm-tossed air beneath them. Suddenly, a particularly violent gust caught them off guard. Frodo felt his eagle roll to the side, its mighty wings battling against the tempest. In that moment of disorientation, Frodo's grip loosened, and he felt himself slipping. "No!" he cried out, but it was too late. He was torn from his perch, cast adrift in the howling wind and impenetrable darkness. For a terrifying moment that seemed to stretch into an age, Frodo plummeted through the tempest, the wild winds of the storm snatching at his clothes and hair. Lightning rent the sky asunder, revealing in brief, terrible glimpses the vast emptiness beneath him, and the ground lost in a sea of roiling clouds. In his heart, he felt a great despair, as if all the shadows of Mordor were reaching up to claim him. "Is this real?" Frodo wondered, "or some foul vision sent to torment me?" For the lines between memory, dream, and waking seemed to blur as he fell. His hand clutched at his breast where the ring lay hidden, its chain biting into his flesh. Its weight was as an anchor burning against his skin, reminding him of his charge and of all that would be lost should he fail. Visions of the Shire, fair and green, flashed before his mind's eye, along with the faces of those he held dear: Sam, Merry, Pippin, and Gandalf. "Alas," thought he, "that I should bring ruin upon all I sought to protect. I understand not what fate has befallen me, yet I fear I have failed you all." The wind seemed to carry fell whispers of a future where shadow reigned unchecked, where the beauty of Middle-earth withered under the Dark Lord's gaze. Frodo felt the weight of a destiny beyond his comprehension pressing down upon him, heavier than the rushing air that tore at his raiment. Another flash of lightning revealed a great winged shape hurtling past. Eagle or fell beast, he could not tell. In the chaos of the storm, friend and foe alike were lost in shadow and confusion. Yet even as hope abandoned him and he prepared to meet his doom, salvation came unlooked for. As suddenly as he had begun to fall, Frodo felt solid form beneath him once more. By some grace of the Valar, or perhaps by the keen sight of the great eagles, he found himself astride feathered back. Though in the darkness and tumult he knew not which of his allies had saved him, gratitude flooded his heart. His fingers dug into wet feathers, clinging to this unexpected deliverance. The quest, it seemed, was not yet lost. "Who's there?" a familiar voice shouted over the wind. "Pippin!" Frodo called back, relief flooding through him. "It's me, Frodo!" "Frodo! Thank goodness!" Pippin's voice was barely audible. "I've lost sight of the others. This storm, it's like nothing I've ever seen." As they spoke, a flash of lightning illuminated the chaos around them. For a brief moment, Frodo caught glimpses of the other eagles, each battling the wind, each carrying its hobbit passenger, but they were scattered, separated by the fury of the storm. "We have to find a way to regroup," Frodo shouted. "But how? We can barely see a thing in this darkness." As if in answer to his question, a memory surfaced in Frodo's mind. He remembered the fireworks they had brought along, a handful of Gandalf's creations that Merry and Pippin had, true to form, managed to sneak into their packs before leaving the Shire. Could they use them to signal their position? "Pippin!" Frodo called out. "Do you have any of Gandalf's fireworks with you?" "I do," Pippin replied. "But how can we light them in this wind?" Frodo's mind raced. "The lightning! If we can time it right, maybe we can use the lightning to ignite the fireworks." It was a desperate plan, but in their current situation, desperation was all they had. Frodo explained his idea to Pippin and the eagle carrying them. The noble bird, though struggling against the tempest, agreed to help. As the next flash of lightning approached, Pippin held out one of the fireworks. Frodo, timing his move carefully, struck his tinderbox just as the lightning illuminated the sky. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sudden whoosh, the firework ignited. A burst of golden sparks exploded in the darkness, briefly illuminating the storm around them. In that fleeting moment of light, Frodo caught sight of Sam and Merry, not far off to their left. "There!" Frodo shouted, pointing. The eagle beneath them banked sharply, fighting against the wind to move closer to their companions. As they neared, Frodo could hear Sam's voice calling out, "Mr. Frodo, is that you?" "We're here, Sam," Frodo called back. "Follow the light." Slowly, painstakingly, they managed to regroup. The eagles, guided by the sporadic bursts of fireworks, drew closer together, forming a tight formation to better weather the storm. As another flash of lightning illuminated the sky, Frodo caught a glimpse of Sam's face. His faithful friend looked pale and drawn, his usual cheerful demeanor replaced by a grim determination. Frodo felt a pang of guilt. Once again, he had dragged his friends into danger. "Sam!" Frodo called out. "Are you all right?" Sam managed a weak smile. "I'm holding on, Mr. Frodo, though I must say, I'm beginning to understand why hobbits were meant to keep their feet on the ground." Despite the dire situation, Frodo couldn't help but chuckle. Leave it to Sam to find a bit of humor even in the darkest of times. With the Fellowship reunited, a new determination seemed to fill the eagles. Their wings beat with renewed vigor, pushing against the relentless winds. Hail pelted them from all sides, and freezing rain mixed with snow threatened to weigh down their feathers. But still they pressed on. Inch by excruciating inch, they climbed higher. The wind howled its fury, lightning lashed out as if trying to drag them back down, but the eagles would not be denied. With one final Herculean effort, they burst through the top of the storm clouds. For a moment, all was still. Above them, stars twinkled in a clear night sky, a stark contrast to the chaos below. The hobbits gasped for breath in the thin, frigid air, their lungs burning from the exertion. But their respite was brief. With a sound like tearing cloth, the clouds beneath them split open, revealing a nightmarish landscape. Far below, Frodo could see the twisted lands that bordered Mordor. Rivers of fire cut through blackened earth, and in the distance, Mount Doom loomed, a sinister pinnacle vomiting ash and smoke into the sky. "Great heavens," Pippin whispered, his voice filled with awe and terror. The sight seemed to affect the eagles as well. Their mighty wings, which had battled the storm so valiantly, now beat with less vigor. Frodo could feel the exhaustion in the creature beneath him, its breaths coming in labored gasps. "We cannot go on like this," the lead eagle announced, its voice heavy with fatigue. "We must find a place to rest, or we risk falling from the sky." Frodo's heart sank. They were so close to their goal, yet still so far. But he knew the eagles spoke the truth. They had pushed themselves to the limit and beyond. "There!" Sam's voice cut through Frodo's thoughts. "Look!" Following Sam's outstretched arm, Frodo saw a glimmer of hope. Amidst the desolate landscape below, a small plateau jutted out from the side of a mountain. It wasn't much, but it offered a chance for respite. With the last of their strength, the eagles descended towards the rocky outcropping. The landing was rough, the exhausted birds barely managing to touch down without crashing. As soon as they were on solid ground, the hobbits slid from their mounts, their legs wobbly from the long flight. As the hobbits gathered their bearings, the full impact of their harrowing journey became apparent. Frodo's limbs felt leaden, every movement a struggle against bone-deep weariness. His skin stung from the lashing wind and icy rain, and his throat was raw from shouting against the storm. Sam winced as he stretched, his muscles protesting after hours of tense gripping. His hands were cramped and blistered from clutching the eagle's feathers, and his face bore angry red marks from the pelting hail. Merry and Pippin fared no better. Pippin swayed on his feet, his usual boundless energy sapped by the ordeal. Merry rubbed at his ears, still ringing from the deafening thunder, his balance not quite steady after the dizzying flight. "I never thought I'd say this," Pippin mumbled, his voice hoarse. "But I find myself longing for the solid earth beneath my feet." Merry nodded in weary agreement. "At least on the ground, you don't have to worry about falling to your death if you loosen your grip." Despite their exhaustion, a weak chuckle passed through the group. They were battered and worn, but alive and together. "We will rest here," the lead eagle declared, its voice a mixture of relief and concern. "But we must remain vigilant. We are in enemy territory now." As they began to set up their meager camp, each movement was a testament to their resilience and determination. As they worked, Frodo's thoughts drifted back to their harrowing journey through the tempest. Despite the ache in his muscles and the weariness that threatened to overwhelm him, he couldn't help but marvel at what they had just endured. The memory of the storm's fury made their current predicament seem almost peaceful in comparison. "I can hardly believe we made it through that storm," he murmured, more to himself than to his companions. Sam, overhearing, nodded in agreement. "Aye, Mr. Frodo. It's not a tale many will believe back in the Shire, that's for certain." Their words hung in the air, a reminder of the incredible journey they were undertaking and the challenges they had already overcome. With renewed determination, they turned their attention back to the task at hand, each hobbit drawing strength from their shared experience. As the hobbits continued to set up their meagre camp, an uneasy silence fell over the group. The initial relief of finding a place to rest gradually gave way to a growing sense of foreboding. The air itself seemed to thicken with tension, carrying with it the acrid scent of Mordor's fires. Merry paused in his work, his brow furrowed with concern. "Does anyone else feel like we're being watched?" Pippin nodded, his usual cheerfulness subdued. "It's as if the very rocks have eyes." Sam glanced nervously at the darkening sky. "Mr. Frodo," he said softly, "perhaps we should ask the eagles if they can sense anything amiss." Frodo, who had been lost in thought, looked up sharply at Sam's words. He realized that he, too, had been feeling an increasing sense of dread, a familiar darkness pressing at the edges of his mind. The ring seemed to pulse against his chest, as if responding to some unseen threat. With a growing sense of urgency, Frodo rose to his feet, his eyes scanning the horizon. It was then that he noticed the ominous change in the landscape before them. Frodo found himself drawn to the edge of the plateau. From this vantage point, he could see the fires of Mordor burning on the horizon, so close yet still so far. He turned to the eagles, their proud forms now hunched with exhaustion, and felt a wave of gratitude and concern wash over him. They had survived this trial, but at what cost? And what new dangers awaited them in the shadow of Mordor? "A fell sight indeed, is it not, Mr. Frodo?" Sam's voice came from beside him, gesturing towards the ominous landscape before them. Frodo nodded, unable to find words to express the dread that filled his heart. The ring felt heavier than ever, its oppressive presence seeming to grow stronger with each passing moment. Do you think he knows we're here?" Pippin asked, his voice small and frightened. Before Frodo could respond, a bone-chilling screech filled the air. In the distance, dark shapes took flight from the towers of Mordor, their fell cries echoing across the desolate landscape. "Nazgûl!" Frodo whispered, his blood running cold. The eagles stirred, their feathers ruffling in agitation. "The Nine have taken to the skies," the lead eagle said grimly. "Sauron's eye turns towards us." The realization hit Frodo like a physical blow. Sauron was aware of their presence. The Dark Lord's gaze was searching for them, hunting them. The relative safety of their aerial journey was at an end. The implications of the Nazgûl's presence weighed heavily on the group. These were no ordinary foes. They were the most terrible of Sauron's servants, relentless in their pursuit and nearly impossible to defeat. "If the Nazgûl are airborne," Merry said, his voice tight with worry, "won't they be able to spot us easily from above?" The lead eagle ruffled his feathers in agitation. "We have ways of evading them, but it will make our journey far more perilous. We'll need to change our course." "And what if they catch up to us?" Pippin asked, unable to keep the tremor from his voice. Frodo felt a chill run down his spine at the thought. He remembered all too vividly his encounter with the Nazgûl at Weathertop, the icy pain of the Morgul blade. He unconsciously rubbed his shoulder, a ghostly ache prickling at his skin, despite the absence of any wound. It was as if his body remembered the pain from his last untaken journey. "Then we fight," Sam said firmly, his hand on the hilt of his sword. "We've come too far to give up now, Mr. Frodo. We'll not let them stop us, if you take my meaning." The eagles exchanged glances, a mix of admiration and concern in their eyes. "Your courage is admirable, little ones," one of them said, "but our priority must be to avoid detection for as long as possible." Frodo nodded, understanding the gravity of their situation. The presence of the Nazgûl changed everything. Their journey, already fraught with danger, had just become infinitely more treacherous. "We'll need to fly through the mountain passes," Frodo suggested, looking to the eagles for confirmation. "The terrain might offer us some cover." "A risky but clever strategy," the lead eagle agreed. "The mountains are treacherous, but so is the open sky with the nine abroad. As the group prepared for this new, more dangerous leg of their journey, Frodo couldn't help but feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. The ring seemed to grow heavier around his neck, as if it sensed the proximity of its master's most powerful servants. He knew that if they were caught, it wouldn't just mean failure for their quest. It would mean the end of all hope for Middle-earth. "What do we do now?" Merry asked, voicing the question on everyone's mind. Frodo looked at his companions, seeing the fear and uncertainty in their eyes, but beneath that he saw something else: courage, determination, the unwavering loyalty that had brought them this far. "We press on," Frodo said, his voice stronger than he felt. "We've come too far to turn back now. Whatever challenges lie ahead, we'll face them together." The others nodded, drawing strength from his words. Even the eagles seemed to stand a little taller, their weariness momentarily forgotten in the face of their shared resolve. As night fell fully, they huddled together on the rocky plateau, the winds of Mordor howling around them. Sleep was elusive, each of them lost in their own thoughts and fears. Frodo found himself staring into the darkness, the weight of their quest pressing down on him. They had survived the storm of shadows, but he knew that greater trials lay ahead. The closer they got to Mordor, the stronger Sauron's influence would become. He thought back to the Ent's question, the reason for this journey. Why hadn't they taken the eagles in the first place? Now, as they teetered on the brink of Mordor, facing dangers he couldn't have imagined, Frodo began to understand. This path, while seemingly easier at first, had its own perils, perils that could very well prove their undoing. As the night wore on, tension hung in the air like a physical presence. Every sound, every shadow seemed to hold potential danger. The Nazgûl's cries echoed in the distance, a constant reminder of the enemy's vigilance. Frodo's hand strayed to his chest, feeling the outline of the ring through the fabric. Its whispers seemed louder now, more insistent. He could feel its desire to return to its master, to betray their presence to the searching eye of Sauron. As Frodo's fingers traced the shape of the ring, he felt a sudden, overwhelming surge of its power. The world around him seemed to fade, replaced by visions of terrible beauty and might. He saw himself no longer a small hobbit, but a being of immense power, standing atop the tower of Barad-dûr. The armies of Mordor knelt before him, and even the Nazgûl bowed their heads in submission. For a moment the temptation was almost unbearable. With the ring, he could end this conflict swiftly, bending even Sauron to his will. No more sneaking, no more fear, no more watching his friends suffer. But as quickly as the vision came, it shattered. Frodo gasped, cold sweat beading on his brow. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to his core, that this was the ring's deception. It promised power, but would deliver only ruin. The whispers grew more insistent, a clamour of beguiling whispers and fell warnings. It took all of Frodo's willpower to resist the urge to slip the ring on his finger, to disappear from this perilous place. He could feel the ring's malevolence pressing against his mind, seeking any crack in his resolve. "I am weary beyond measure," Frodo thought, his mental defences wavering. "How much longer can I endure?" Just as he felt his resistance beginning to crumble, a memory surfaced, Gandalf's voice, warm and reassuring from their last conversation in the Shire. "Remember, Frodo, even the smallest person can change the course of the future. Your strength lies not in the power you wield, but in the goodness of your heart." Frodo took a deep, shuddering breath, forcing the ring's influence back. He was Frodo Baggins of the Shire, not a wielder of dark powers. He had a task to complete, and friends who depended on him. But as he looked out over the blasted landscape of Mordor, Frodo couldn't shake the feeling that this battle with the ring's influence was far from over. The closer they got to Mount Doom, the stronger its pull would become, and he wasn't sure how long he could resist. "Mr. Frodo?" Sam's whisper cut through the darkness. "You should try to get some sleep. Who knows when we'll get another chance to rest." Frodo nodded, grateful for Sam's constant care. "You're right, Sam, though I fear sleep will bring little comfort in this place." As he settled down, trying to find a comfortable position on the hard rock, Frodo's mind wandered to what lay ahead. They were so close to Mordor now, to Mount Doom, but the final leg of their journey would likely prove to be the most perilous. The eagles, while noble and powerful, could not carry them all the way to the fiery mountain. At some point, they would have to continue on foot, exposed to all the dangers of Mordor's blighted landscape. And what of Sauron's forces? Now that the Dark Lord was aware of their presence, what horrors would he send to intercept them? The Nazgûl were just the beginning, Frodo was sure. As sleep finally began to claim him, Frodo's last thoughts were of the Shire, of the peaceful green hills that seemed a lifetime away. He clung to those memories, using them as a shield against the encroaching darkness. With the first light of dawn, they would take to the skies once more, flying ever closer to the heart of Mordor. What challenges awaited them, Frodo could only guess. But as he drifted off to sleep, he made a silent vow. No matter what came, he would see this quest through to the end. For the Shire, for his friends, for all of Middle-earth. The fate of the world rested on their success. And as the fires of Mount Doom flickered on the horizon, Frodo Baggins, a small hobbit from the Shire, prepared himself for the greatest test of his life. Chapter 4. The Fell Beasts Arise. The first light of dawn broke over the desolate landscape, casting long shadows across the barren rock. Frodo stirred from his uneasy slumber, his body aching from the hard ground and the rigours of their flight. As he sat up, rubbing the sleep from his eyes, he saw that the others were already awake, their faces grim and tired. "Did any of you get a wink of sleep?" Pippin asked, his usual cheerful tone subdued. Merry shook his head. "Not with those awful screeches in the distance. I've never heard anything like it." Frodo stood, stretching his stiff limbs, and walked to the edge of the plateau. In the growing light he could see it clearly now. Mordor, the land of shadow, sprawled before them like a festering wound on the face of Middle-earth. Dark mountains ringed the borders, and beyond them a red glow pulsed ominously, as if the very land was alive with dark energy. "It fair takes the breath away, and not in a good way, Mr. Frodo. I never thought I'd see such a dreadful place with my own eyes." Sam's voice came from beside him. Frodo nodded, unable to find words to express the dread that filled his heart. The ring felt heavier than ever, its pull stronger now that they were so close to its place of origin. "Is this how it ends?" Frodo thought to himself. "Have we come all this way only to fail at the very threshold of Mordor?" Frodo turned his gaze to their majestic allies, his heart sinking at the sight. The eagle's once glossy feathers were now matted and singed, bearing testament to their perilous flight through storm and shadow. Their proud heads drooped, eyes heavy-lidded with exhaustion. One eagle nearby preened its wing, revealing angry red welts where embers had struck during their journey. The great bird's breaths came in laboured pants, their mighty chests heaving with each inhalation of the acrid air. Frodo could hear the rasp in their throats, a harsh reminder of the ash and fumes they had endured. As one shifted its weight, he noticed its talons trembling slightly against the rocky ground. Despite their weariness, the eagles remained vigilant, their keen eyes scanning the horizon. But even their legendary stamina had limits, and Frodo could see those limits had been pushed to the breaking point. The journey had taken its toll, and he wondered how much strength remained in their battered bodies for the challenges that lay ahead. The lead eagle approached the hobbits, its eyes reflecting the fiery glow on the horizon. "We must move soon," it said, its voice low and urgent. "The enemy's servants are abroad, and we are exposed here. As if to emphasize the eagle's words, a bone-chilling screech split the air. Frodo's blood ran cold. He knew that sound all too well. "Nazgûl," he whispered, his hand instinctively moving to clutch the ring around his neck. "They're coming for us. For the ring. Can we outfly them? Should we even try?" "Quick!" the lead eagle commanded. "We must take flight now." In a flurry of movement, the hobbits jumped from the cliffs and scrambled onto the backs of their eagle mounts. Frodo's heart pounded in his chest as he settled between the great bird's wings, his fingers gripping the feathers tightly. "This is it," he thought. "There's no turning back now." With powerful beats of their wings, the eagles launched from the plateau, soaring into the ashen sky. As they gained altitude, Frodo looked back, and his breath caught in his throat. Dark shapes were rising from the towers of Mordor, their forms becoming clearer as they approached with terrifying speed. The Nazgûl had taken to the air, mounted on fell beasts whose leathery wings cut through the sky with deadly purpose. Their piercing cries echoed across the barren landscape, filling Frodo's heart with terror. "They're coming!" Merry shouted, his voice barely audible over the rush of wind. The lead eagle's voice rang out, steady despite the approaching danger. "Hold fast, little ones, we must outfly them." But even as the words left the eagle's beak, Frodo knew it would not be so simple. The fell beasts were faster, unencumbered by passengers, and driven by the relentless will of their dark masters. "We cannot hope to outpace them," Frodo realized with growing dread. "We'll have to fight our way through." The first attack came swiftly. A fell beast dove from above, its rider's sword glinting dully in the red light of Mordor. Frodo's eagle banked sharply to avoid the strike, nearly dislodging him from his perch. "Sam!" Frodo cried out, searching frantically for his friend amidst the chaos. "I'm here, Mr. Frodo!" Sam's voice came from nearby, strained but determined. "Fear not for me, Mr. Frodo." The sky erupted into a frenzy of wings and claws, screeches and cries. The eagles fought valiantly, their sharp beaks and talons proving formidable weapons against the fell beasts. But the Nazgûl were relentless, their dark sorcery lending strength to their mounts. Frodo clung desperately to his eagle as it twisted and dove, narrowly avoiding the slashing claws of a fell beast. He could hear the clash of steel on beak as the eagles fended off the Nazgûl's blades. "We can't keep this up forever," Frodo thought, his mind racing. "There has to be another way." A cry of pain cut through the din of battle. Frodo turned to see one of the eagles faltering, blood matting its feathers where a Nazgûl's sword had found its mark. The injured eagle struggled to maintain altitude, its wing beats growing weaker. "Hold on!" Frodo shouted to the eagle and its riders. "We'll find a way through this." The lead eagle's voice rang out, filled with determination. "We cannot falter now. The fate of Middle-earth depends on our success." Inspired by these words, the injured eagle seemed to find new strength, pushing through the pain to keep pace with its kin. Frodo felt a surge of admiration for the noble creatures. "They're risking everything for us, for this quest. We can't let their sacrifice be in vain." The battle raged on, a deadly dance of wings and wills high above the blasted landscape of Mordor. A Nazgûl's blade sliced through the air, missing Frodo by inches, but cutting through the straps of his pack. He watched in dismay as their supplies, food, water and other essentials, tumbled away into the ashen sky. "We can't keep this up forever, Mr. Frodo," Sam shouted, his voice tinged with desperation. Frodo knew he was right. They were outnumbered and outmatched. The borders of Mordor loomed ahead, a forbidding wall of mountains and shadow. In that moment, Frodo made a decision that he hoped he wouldn't regret. "We have to end this quickly, before we're all brought down." "We must push on," he called out to the eagles and his companions. "Straight for Mount Doom!" The lead eagle's reply was grim but resolute. "Into the heart of shadow we fly, then. Hold tight, Ringbearer. This may be our most perilous flight yet." With a mighty beat of their wings, the eagles angled towards the menacing peak of Mount Doom. The fell beasts followed, their shrieks growing more frenzied as their quarry neared the domain of their master. As they approached the fiery mountain, Frodo could feel the foreboding and wicked presence of Sauron growing stronger. The ring pulsed against his chest, its whispers becoming a roar in his mind. But he gritted his teeth, focusing on the task at hand. "We've come too far to falter now. We have to see this through, no matter the cost." The air grew hotter, filled with ash and fumes from the volcano. The eagles struggled against the turbulent currents, their mighty wings beating harder with each passing moment. Frodo could feel the exhaustion in his mount, matching his own weariness. "We're almost there," Merry shouted, his voice hoarse from the acrid air. But their progress had not gone unnoticed. From the tower of Barad-dûr, a great eye of fire turned its gaze upon them. Frodo felt the weight of that terrible attention, and the ring seemed to burn against his chest. "He sees us," Frodo realized with horror. "Sauron knows we're here." Suddenly the air around them filled with arrows and spears launched from the armies gathering on the plain below. The eagles weaved and dodged, but they couldn't avoid every projectile. Frodo heard cries of pain from both birds and hobbits as some found their mark. "We can't turn back now," Frodo called out, his voice filled with grim determination. "We have to see this through." The others nodded, their faces set with resolve despite their fear and exhaustion. They had come too far, endured too much to give up now. As they neared Mount Doom, the attacks from the fell beasts intensified. The Nazgûl, sensing their prey's weakness, pressed their advantage. One swooped close, its rider's blade slashing at the wing of Sam's eagle. The noble bird cried out in pain, but managed to stay aloft, though its flight became noticeably labored. The injured eagle that carried Merry and Pippin finally succumbed to its wounds. Its once majestic wings now hung limp, barely able to catch the air. With each labored flap, it drifted lower, its flight erratic and desperate. "Frodo!" Merry and Pippin's voices carried on the wind, a desperate cry that pierced through the chaos. "We can't make it. The eagle's too hurt." Frodo's heart clenched, torn between his friends and his duty. But before he could respond, Pippin's voice rang out again, stronger this time. "Don't you dare stop, Frodo Baggins. You throw that cursed thing into the fire." "We've come too far to fail now," Merry added, his words laced with both fear and fierce determination. "End this, Frodo, for the Shire, for all of Middle-earth." Their voices faded as the distance between them grew, but their words echoed in Frodo's mind, steeling his resolve. He tightened his grip on the ring, its weight seeming to increase with each passing moment. "I will," he whispered, a solemn vow to his friends and to himself. "I swear it." Yet even as determination filled him, Frodo's eyes remained fixed on his plummeting friends. The eagle's eyes, once sharp and keen, now glazed over with pain and exhaustion. It had nothing left to give. Its proud head drooped, and its talons curled inward as if already accepting defeat. In a last, heroic effort, it managed to angle its descent towards a high ledge on Mount Doom itself. With a sickening thud that Frodo felt in his bones, the eagle crashed onto the rocky outcrop. Merry and Pippin tumbled from its back, rolling dangerously close to the edge, before scrambling to safety. For a moment Frodo's heart lifted. They were alive, but his relief was short-lived. From his vantage point high above, Frodo's keen eyes caught sight of movement in the shadows below. A horde of orcs, their armor glinting dully in the red glow of Mount Doom, swarmed towards the ledge. The wounded eagle raised its head one last time, defiant to the end, before disappearing under a wave of cruel blades and clubs. Merry and Pippin stood back to back, their small swords drawn, as the orcs encircled them. Frodo strained his eyes, desperate for any sign of hope, but the orcs closed in, blocking his view. The last he saw was a flash of hobbit-sized mail before the mass of orcs obscured everything. Then, rising above the clamour of battle, Frodo heard two distinct cries of pain, voices he knew all too well. The sound cut through him like a knife, and he watched in horror as two small bodies were lifted above the crowd of orcs, limp and unmoving. The cruel creatures roared in triumph, brandishing their grisly trophies. Merry, Pippin, Frodo thought, his heart shattering within him. "I'm so sorry. This is all my fault." Guilt crashed over him like a physical wave, threatening to drown him in despair. He wrestled with the overwhelming urge to turn back, to try and save them somehow. But the rational part of his mind knew it was already too late. His dear friends were gone, 2 more casualties in this terrible quest. Frodo's hands trembled as he clutched at the ring hanging around his neck. Its weight seemed to increase tenfold, dragging at his very soul. He could feel something breaking inside him, a hairline fracture in his resolve that threatened to shatter his entire being. Tears streamed down his face, cutting clean trails through the grime and ash. "We have to finish this," Frodo whispered, his voice cracking, "for their sake as well as everyone else's." But even as he spoke the words, Frodo felt a piece of himself wither and die, lost forever with Merry and Pippin in the shadows of Mount Doom. Frodo's hands trembled as he clutched at the ring hanging around his neck. Its weight seemed to increase tenfold, dragging at his very soul. He could feel something breaking inside him, a hairline fracture in his resolve that threatened to shatter his entire being. Tears streamed down his face, cutting clean trails through the grime and ash. "We have to finish this," Frodo whispered, his voice cracking, "for their sake as well as everyone else's." But even as he spoke the words, Frodo felt a piece of himself wither and die, lost forever in the shadows of Mount Doom. The remaining eagles, now carrying only Frodo and Sam, pushed on towards the summit of Mount Doom. The fell beasts circled them like vultures, looking for any sign of weakness. As they neared the fiery crater, a new sound filled the air, a sound that chilled Frodo to his very core. It was a voice, terrible and powerful, speaking words in a language he didn't understand, but that filled him with dread. "Sauron," Frodo whispered, recognizing the dark presence that now focused all its malice upon them. The Dark Lord had entered the fray himself, unwilling to let the ring slip from his grasp when it was so close. This is it, Frodo thought, the final test. Everything we've done, everything we've sacrificed, it all comes down to this moment. "We have to keep going!" Frodo shouted to Sam and the eagles. "We're so close!" But as they approached the crater, a wall of dark energy seemed to rise before them. The eagles beat their wings furiously, fighting against the invisible barrier, but their progress slowed to a crawl. Frodo could feel the heat of Mount Doom beneath them, see the swirling lava in the crater below. They were mere moments away from their goal, but Sauron's power held them at bay. "We can't break through!" the lead eagle cried out, its voice strained with effort. Frodo's mind raced. They couldn't turn back. The fell beasts and Nazgûl were closing in behind them. They couldn't land. The slopes of Mount Doom were too steep and treacherous. Their only hope was to somehow break through Sauron's barrier and reach the heart of the volcano. "There has to be a way," Frodo thought desperately. "We can't have come this far only to fail now." As the fell beasts closed in and Sauron's power pressed against them, Frodo made a desperate decision. "We have to push through," he shouted. "With everything we have left, it's our only chance." Sam's voice came from nearby, filled with unwavering loyalty. "I'm with you, Mr. Frodo, until the very last." The eagles, though exhausted, gave a mighty cry of determination. With the last of their strength, they beat their wings, straining against the dark power that sought to hold them back. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, they hung there, suspended between hope and despair, between victory and defeat. The fate of Middle-earth balanced on a knife's edge. Then, with a sound like shattering glass, they broke through. The barrier of dark energy dissipated, and they surged forward towards the heart of Mount Doom. But their victory was short-lived. As they breached the barrier, a blast of heat and ash engulfed them. The eagles, already at the limit of their endurance, faltered in the face of this new onslaught. As they neared the crater of Mount Doom, the air itself seemed to thicken with malevolence. The volcanic fires dimmed, as if cowering from a greater darkness. A bone-deep chill swept over Frodo, despite the intense heat surrounding them. The ring on its chain grew impossibly heavy, pulling at his neck with an almost sentient desperation. From the roiling smoke and ash emerged a shape of nightmare, the Witch King of Angmar, Lord of the Nazgûl. Once a great king of men, he had fallen to the corrupting power of one of the 9 rings, becoming the most terrible of Sauron's servants. His black robes billowed around him, seeming to absorb all light. Where a face should be, there was only darkness beneath his spiked crown. Yet Frodo could feel the weight of his gaze, piercing and terrible. The Witch King's presence was an assault on the senses. The air around him shimmered with unnatural energies, each movement leaving trails of shadow. In his gauntleted hand, he wielded a great mace of dark metal, crackling with fell sorcery. This was the weapon that had shattered kingdoms and broken the gates of Minas Tirith itself. But it was not just the Nazgûl Lord they faced. Through him, Frodo could sense the overwhelming presence of Sauron himself. The Dark Lord's will flowed through his most powerful servant, magnifying the Witch King's already formidable powers. A voice spoke, not in sound, but directly into Frodo's mind, a cacophony of whispers and screams that threatened to drive him mad. "Long have I waited, little thief. Here, at the heart of my domain, with my creation so near, my will is law. You cannot hope to stand against the power of Mordor." Frodo realized with mounting horror the full extent of their peril. The ring, so close to the fires of its creation, sang with dark energy. Mount Doom, the birthplace of Sauron's greatest work, amplified the already immense power of the Nazgûl, and the very air of Mordor, saturated with millennia of evil, served as a conduit for Sauron's malevolence. The Witch King raised his mace, the weapon humming with a deep discordant note that set Frodo's teeth on edge and made his bones ache. In this moment, with the fate of Middle-earth hanging in the balance, Frodo knew with chilling certainty that this embodiment of Sauron's will could destroy them as surely as the Dark Lord himself. With a speed that belied his imposing form, the Witch King drew back the mace. The weapon left a trail of writhing shadows as it arced through the air, growing in size and power. Time seemed to slow as Frodo watched in horror, realizing too late the Nazgûl's intention. With a sound like 1,000 screaming souls, the mace connected with both eagles in one devastating sweep, the impact sending shock waves of dark energy through the air. As the mace struck, Frodo felt a surge of fell power. The very air around them shimmered with the Dark Lord's presence, his unseen eye fixed upon the ring. In that moment, Frodo understood that they faced not just the most powerful of the 9, but the full, terrible will of Sauron himself, channeled through his most dreadful servant. The Witch King's devastating attack sent shockwaves through the air, causing the eagles to falter mid-flight. Frodo felt himself slipping, his grip on the eagle's feathers loosening as the world spun wildly around him. The heat of Mount Doom rushed up to meet them, the air thick with ash and sulphurous fumes that burned their lungs. "Mr. Frodo!" Sam's voice cut through the chaos, tinged with desperation. "We're losing control. We have to jump." Through the dizzying tumble, Frodo caught glimpses of their only hope for survival, a narrow stone bridge spanning the fiery chasm below. With every rotation of their falling eagle, it seemed to grow further away, then rush towards them, a dizzying dance of fire and stone. "Aim for the bridge!" Sam shouted, his voice barely audible over the roar of the volcano and the rush of wind. Frodo's heart raced as he realized the terrible choice before them. Jump from the falling eagle and risk the perilous landing on the narrow bridge, or remain on the eagle's back and plummet into the fires of Mount Doom. Summoning every ounce of courage he possessed, Frodo prepared himself for the desperate jump. "Sam!" Frodo cried out, reaching blindly for his friend. Their hands clasped for a moment before the violent spin tore them apart again. As they plummeted towards the fiery heart of Mount Doom, the lead eagle's voice cut through the roar of the volcano, filled with both pain and determination. "Frodo Baggins!" it cried, its voice strained but resolute. "The fate of Middle-earth rests in your hands. You must not fail." With its last reserves of strength, the noble bird twisted in the air, positioning itself beneath Frodo and Sam. Its wings, though broken and battered, spread wide one final time. "May the winds of the free peoples carry you to victory," the eagle declared. Then, with a powerful thrust that would seal its own doom, it launched Frodo and Sam upward towards the narrow stone bridge. As the eagle plunged into the lava below, sacrificing itself for their mission, Frodo's heart swelled with a mixture of grief and renewed purpose. The heat was overwhelming, singeing their hair and clothes as they soared through the air. Above them, the Witch King's terrible laugh echoed, a sound of triumph and malice that seemed to shake the very foundations of the mountain. "We will not let your sacrifice be in vain," Frodo shouted, his words nearly lost in the volcanic roar. "For the eagles, for Middle-earth, we must finish this." Sam's hand found Frodo's in the chaos, their fingers intertwining in a grip born of shared purpose and unwavering friendship. Together they hurtled through the ash-filled air, the narrow bridge rushing towards them at a dizzying speed. Suspended between certain death and the faintest hope of survival, Frodo's mind filled with fleeting images of the Shire, the green hills, the laughing faces of friends, places he might never see again. The ring burned against his chest, its weight a constant reminder of their quest's burden and the terrible price of failure. In those last moments, as Frodo and Sam flew towards their final destination, the fires of Mount Doom reaching up as if to reclaim the ring, and the fate of Middle-earth hanging by the thinnest of threads, a single thought filled Frodo's mind. This can't be how it ends. We must succeed here and now. The bridge loomed before them, a slim hope in a sea of fire. Would their desperate flight carry them to salvation, or would they fall short, plunging into the inferno below? As Frodo and Sam stretched out their free hands, reaching for the stone edge, the outcome of their quest and the fate of Middle-earth balanced on a knife's edge. Chapter 5. The Fall of Hope. The world was a blur of heat and ash as Frodo and Sam hurtled through the air, propelled by the noble eagle's final act of sacrifice. The fiery heart of Mount Doom loomed below them, a maw of molten rock eager to claim them. The air roared around them, thick with sulphur and despair, searing their lungs with each desperate breath. In these fleeting moments, suspended between the eagle's heroic push and their uncertain fate, Frodo's mind raced through a lifetime of memories. The green hills of the Shire, now seeming impossibly distant and peaceful, the faces of friends left behind, their expressions frozen in concern and hope, and the crushing weight of the quest that had brought them to this terrible precipice. The ring, still hanging around Frodo's neck, seemed to pulse with corrupting energy, as if it sensed the proximity of its birthplace. The heat intensified with each passing second, and Frodo could feel his skin blistering, his clothes beginning to smoulder. The eagle's last words echoed in his mind, a reminder of the monumental task still before them, even as death seemed to reach up with fiery fingers. Through the haze of smoke and embers, the narrow stone bridge came into focus. Their target, their last hope of survival. Its rough, blackened surface seemed to mock them, so close yet still beyond reach as they arced through the air. The bridge grew larger in Frodo's vision, but would their desperate flight carry them far enough? Sam, ever faithful even in the face of certain doom, tightened his grip on Frodo's hand. Their eyes met for a brief moment, a lifetime of friendship and shared purpose conveyed in a single glance. With a strength born of desperation and fueled by an unbreakable loyalty, Sam twisted in the air, using the momentum of their flight to pull Frodo closer to the bridge's edge. The rough stone rushed up to meet them, promising either salvation or a cruel end to their quest. Frodo stretched out his free hand, fingers grasping for any hold on the bridge's surface. The fate of Middle-earth, the sacrifices of their eagle allies, and their own lives all hung in the balance as they reached for that slim chance of survival. Frodo's hands scrabbled at the rough stone, fingernails breaking and skin tearing as he sought purchase. For a heart-stopping moment he hung there, legs dangling over the abyss, the heat of the lava below searing his skin through his already tattered clothing. Every muscle screamed in protest as he clung to the edge, the weight of his body and the ring threatening to drag him down into the inferno. "Mr. Frodo!" Sam's voice cut through the roar of the volcano, a beacon of hope in the chaos. Frodo looked up, his vision blurred by sweat and tears, to see his faithful friend land heavily on the bridge, rolling with the impact. The sound of bone meeting stone was audible even over the volcano's rumble, and Sam's face contorted in pain. Yet, without hesitation, without a thought for his own safety, Sam scrambled to his feet and rushed to Frodo's aid. "I've got you," Sam grunted, grasping Frodo's arms and pulling with all his might. His hands were slick with blood from his own injuries, making his grip precarious. Slowly, agonizingly, he hauled Frodo up onto the relative safety of the stone bridge. Each inch gained was a battle against gravity and exhaustion, both hobbits gasping and straining until at last Frodo's body cleared the edge. For a moment they lay there, chests heaving, gasping for breath in the acrid air. The magnitude of their narrow escape washed over them, leaving them trembling and weak. Frodo's eyes met Sam's, and in that glance a lifetime of friendship and shared peril passed between them. They had cheated death once more, together. As their senses slowly recovered from the harrowing flight, Frodo and Sam became acutely aware of the hellish environment that surrounded them. The heat was overwhelming, far beyond anything they had ever experienced. It pressed against them like a physical force, causing their skin to prickle and burn, and making each breath a laborious effort. The air was thick with the reek of sulphur, a choking, rotten egg stench that seared their nostrils and made their eyes water. Ash floated constantly on the superheated currents, settling on their skin and clothes, working its way into every crease and fold. The fine, gritty particles coated their tongues and throats, turning even the simple act of swallowing into a painful ordeal. Beneath them, the stone bridge radiated an intense heat, its rough surface uncomfortably hot even through the soles of their tough hobbit feet. The rock itself seemed alive, vibrating subtly with the mountain's restless power. All around them, the walls of the great cavern glowed with an angry red light, veined with streams of molten rock that oozed and bubbled like the lifeblood of some monstrous creature. The oppressive atmosphere bore down upon them with an almost tangible weight. It was as if the very air was infused with malevolence, the centuries of Sauron's evil having seeped into the very stone of Mount Doom. Frodo felt it most keenly, the ring on its chain seeming to pulse in resonance with the dark power that permeated this place. The roar of the fires below was deafening, a constant, thunderous sound that made communication almost impossible. It was a voice of primal fury, as if the mountain itself was bellowing its defiance against their intrusion. In the scant days since leaving the Shire, through the perils of storm and sky they had faced, never had Frodo and Sam felt so utterly alien, so completely out of place as they did now. Two small hobbits in the very heart of Sauron's realm. The speed of their journey by eagle, which had at first seemed a blessing, now left them feeling unprepared for the magnitude of their task. Yet it was here, in this nightmarish crucible, that the fate of Middle-earth would be decided. But in this realm of fire and shadow, even moments of respite were fleeting. As if the very mountain resented their presence, the brief calm was shattered by a new, more terrible threat. A shadow fell over them, blotting out the ruddy glow of the lava, plunging them into an unnatural darkness. A sound like thunder filled the air, drowning out even the roar of the volcano, and the bridge shook with the impact of a massive landing. Pebbles and dust rained down around them as Frodo looked up, his heart freezing in his chest. There, at the far end of the outcropping, stood the Witch King of Angmar. The Lord of the Nazgûl towered over them, a figure of nightmare made real, his very presence seeming to dim the fires of Mount Doom. His black robes billowed around him, absorbing light rather than reflecting it, while his spiked crown gleamed with an otherworldly malevolence that hurt the eyes to behold. In his gauntleted hand he held a mace that crackled with dark energy, each spark seeming to suck the light from the air around it. Beside him crouched his fell beast, a creature of shadow and malice, its wings spread wide, blocking any hope of escape, its eyes, red as the fires below, fixed upon the hobbits with predatory hunger. Sam struggled to his feet, his movements pained but determined. With unwavering courage, he placed himself between Frodo and the approaching menace, a small figure standing defiant before a tidal wave of darkness. "You'll not have him," Sam declared, his voice steady despite the terror that must have gripped his heart. In that moment he seemed to grow, his shadow cast by the fires of Mount Doom stretching out behind him, tall and unbroken. The Witch King's laughter was like the screech of metal on stone, devoid of mirth and full of malice. It echoed off the cavern walls, a sound that spoke of the end of all hope, of the futility of resistance. With a speed that belied his imposing form, he closed the distance between them, each step shaking the narrow bridge. Sam, brave Sam, stood his ground. He ducked under the Witch King's first swing, the mace passing so close it ruffled his hair and left a trail of darkness in the air. But the second blow caught him squarely in the chest, the crack of breaking ribs audible even over the volcano's roar. The force lifted Sam off his feet, sending him crashing to the ground, his body skidding dangerously close to the edge. "Sam!" Frodo cried out, his voice raw with terror and grief. He scrambled towards his fallen friend, heedless of the looming threat behind him. All that mattered was reaching Sam, helping him, saving him as he had been saved so many times before. Sam's breath came in ragged gasps, each inhalation a struggle against his shattered ribs. Blood trickled from the corner of his mouth, staining his lips crimson. Yet still, impossibly, he managed a smile as Frodo reached his side. "It's all right, Mr. Frodo," he wheezed, his voice barely above a whisper. It's been something, hasn't it? Flying high like birds, seeing things no hobbits ever seen. Scary as it's been, I wouldn't trade it for all the taters in my garden back home, not one bit." Tears streamed down Frodo's face, cutting clean tracks through the ash that coated his skin. Each droplet that fell on Sam's chest seemed to cause him pain, but still, his smile didn't waver. "Don't leave me, Sam, please!" Frodo begged, his voice breaking. "I can't do this without you, I never could." Sam's hand found Frodo's, squeezing weakly. His eyes, though glazed with pain, held a fierce pride and love. "You can, Mr. Frodo, you must. I've brought you as far as I can." He coughed, a wet, terrible sound, before continuing. "You must finish it. Quickly now, throw the ring into the fire. It's up to you. It always was." With those words, Sam's eyes closed, and his hand went limp in Frodo's grasp. The rise and fall of his chest slowed, then stopped altogether. Samwise Gamgee, the bravest of hobbits, the truest of friends, was gone. A roar of rage and grief tore from Frodo's throat, echoing off the walls of the volcano. It was a sound of pure anguish, of a heart breaking beyond repair. He stood, turning to face the Witch King, the ring burning against his chest like a brand, its weight seeming to increase tenfold. The Lord of the Nazgûl loomed before him, a towering embodiment of terror and malice. But Frodo's grief and anger momentarily overshadowed his fear. The Witch King's presence seemed to fill the cavern, his evil aura boring into Frodo's very soul. The empty void beneath the Nazgûl Lord's crown, terrible and mesmerizing, dominated Frodo's vision. In that moment, the weight of his quest, of all they had sacrificed, came crashing down upon him with crushing force. They're all gone, Frodo thought, his mind reeling. Merry, Pippin, the eagles, and now Sam. Oh, Sam! The loss of his dearest friend left a void in his heart, a pain so acute it threatened to overwhelm him. Every memory of their journey together flashed before his eyes. The laughter, the hardships, the unwavering support. All of it lost, gone in an instant. As Frodo stood there, paralyzed by grief and the hypnotic power of the Witch King's unseen gaze, the Lord of the Nazgûl moved. With a speed that seemed impossible for a being of such imposing stature, the Witch King's gauntleted hand shot out, grasping the chain around Frodo's neck. With a sharp tug, the ring came free, leaving a raw, burning welt where it had rested against Frodo's skin. Frodo gasped, the sudden absence of the ring's weight leaving him disoriented and strangely empty. For so long it had been a part of him, its constant presence a burden and a curse. Now, without it, he felt adrift, purposeless. Before he could react, the Witch King's other hand closed around him, armored fingers encircling his small form with crushing force. Frodo felt his ribs creak under the pressure as he was lifted off the ground. For a moment, he found himself face to face with the Nazgûl Lord, close enough to feel the chill of death emanating from the darkness beneath the crown. In the depths of that shadowy visage, Frodo saw the future, a world consumed by shadow, all hope extinguished. Then, with a casual flick of his wrist, as if discarding something of no consequence, the Witch King tossed Frodo from the bridge. As Frodo fell once more, the heat of Mount Doom rising up to meet him, his mind drifted. Time seemed to slow, each second stretching into eternity. He thought of his previous journey, the one he had lived, or dreamed, before this ill-fated flight on eagle's wings. He remembered the long, arduous trek across Middle-earth, the friends he had made, the hardships they had endured together. He saw now the folly of trying to take the easy way out, of attempting to avoid the journey altogether. It was the journey itself, with all its trials and tribulations, that had forged the bonds necessary to defeat evil. The unity of the peoples of Middle-earth, standing together against the darkness, had made all the difference. But they had sacrificed that unity for speed, for convenience, and in doing so had lost everything. But now, as the fires of Mount Doom reached up to claim him, Frodo knew that unity was lost. They had failed, and the consequences would be dire beyond imagining. His last thought, as the heat grew unbearable, was of the Shire and of Sam's garden, now doomed to wither and die under the shadow of evil. The fiery glow of Mount Doom dimmed, its roar fading to a distant rumble as ash and smoke swirled, coalescing into solid forms. From the haze emerged the narrow stone bridge, its rough surface stretching precariously across the chasm of fire below. Atop this treacherous perch stood the Witch King of Angmar, his dark robes billowing in the sulphurous winds, triumph radiating from his imposing form as he held aloft the One Ring. Its golden surface caught the ruddy light of the fires beneath, seeming to pulse with a life of its own. With deliberate slowness, savouring each moment of his victory, the Lord of the Nazgûl extended his hand. As the ring slipped onto his armoured finger, an unnatural stillness fell over the cavern, as if the very air held its breath in anticipation. Suddenly, with a sound like the world itself tearing apart, a massive wave of dark energy exploded outward from the ring. It engulfed the Witch King, who threw back his head in what might have been either agony or ecstasy. The pulse swept across Mordor and beyond, a visible manifestation of evil unleashed upon Middle-earth. As the initial surge dissipated, a terrifying transformation came over the Witch King. His form grew more substantial, the shadows around him deepening and writhing with newfound power. His crown blazed with an unholy light, and a terrible aura of dread expanded outward, choking the very air. Yet even as the ring granted him immense power, the Witch King knew his triumph was not complete. He was but a servant, the mightiest of the nine, but a servant nonetheless. With the ring, he would return to Barad-dûr to present this ultimate prize to his master Sauron. The Dark Lord's victory was at hand, and the Witch King would be exalted above all others in the coming Age of Darkness. As the full implications of his failure washed over him, Frodo's consciousness began to fade. His last vision was of the Witch King, wreathed in shadow and flame, holding aloft the instrument of Middle-earth's doom. The dark energy pulse raced across the land, heralding the fall of all free peoples as Frodo's world faded to black. The dark energy rippled across the lands of Middle-earth, from the highest mountain peaks to the deepest valleys. Every living creature felt the surge of doom-laden power, a moment of universal dread washing over them. It was a shared realization that something fundamental had shifted, that the world as they knew it had ended. In Minas Tirith, the soldiers of Gondor looked to the east in horror as a wave of darkness rolled across the sky, blotting out the sun. The white tree in the courtyard, symbol of their realm's endurance, withered and died in an instant, its leaves turning to ash and blowing away on a foul wind. The stone of the city itself seemed to darken, as if stained by the very shadow that now ruled the world. Deep in the forests of Lothlorien, the elves felt their ancient magic waver and fade. The golden leaves of the malon trees turned black and fell, carpeting the forest floor in a shroud of death. Galadriel, wise and powerful, fell to her knees as visions of a dark future overwhelmed her. Her mirror, which had shown both hope and peril, cracked and shattered, its waters turning to foul sludge. In the halls of Erebor, the dwarves felt the very mountain tremble beneath their feet. The forges, which had burned bright for centuries, sputtered and died as if smothered by an unseen hand. The gold and gems they had hoarded turned dull and lifeless, reflecting only the encroaching darkness. Across Middle-earth, hope died. The Witch King of Angmar, now imbued with the terrible power of the One Ring, soared across the ashen skies of Mordor atop his fell beast. The dark energy pulse that had exploded from the ring upon his claiming it continued to ripple across Middle-earth, a harbinger of the doom to come. As he approached the towering fortress of Barad-dûr, the very air seemed to tremble with anticipation. The great eye of Sauron, perched atop the tower, fixed its fiery gaze upon the approaching Nazgûl Lord. The Witch King landed in the highest courtyard, where the presence of Sauron, though formless, was palpable and overwhelming. Kneeling before the manifestation of his master's will, the Witch King presented the One Ring. "My lord," he intoned, his voice a mixture of triumph and reverence, "I bring you that which was lost. The ring is yours once more." The ring rose from the Witch King's outstretched hand, suspended in the air by Sauron's unseen power. As it hovered there, a shockwave of pure malevolence burst forth, dwarfing even the earlier pulse from the Witch King's claim. The very foundations of Middle-earth shook as Sauron's power, long held in check, was fully restored. Sauron's will, terrible and thunderous, manifested as a voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "You have served me well, my most faithful servant. You shall be exalted above all others in the age to come." As the ring's power flowed into Sauron, the Witch King felt his own strength diminish. The brief moment of godlike power he had experienced was nothing compared to the full might of his master. Yet he did not resent this loss. Instead, a dark ecstasy filled him as he sensed Sauron's will coursing through his being, stronger than ever before. The Witch King knew his role now. He would be the hand of Sauron, the physical manifestation of the Dark Lord's power in the world. Where Sauron's formless malice could not tread, the Witch King would go, leading the armies of Mordor and crushing all resistance beneath his iron-shod feet. He was no longer merely the lord of the Nazgûl. He had become the avatar of Sauron's conquest, the herald of Middle-earth's doom. With Sauron's power restored and the Witch King as his primary agent, the conquest of Middle-earth began in earnest. The armies of Mordor marched forth, their ranks swelling with each passing moment. The skies darkened as vast flocks of fell beasts took wing, the Nazgûl ready to carry Sauron's dominion to the farthest reaches of the world. Their cries filled the air, a terrible chorus heralding the dawn of a new, dark age. From the smouldering peak of Mount Doom, a wave of darkness spread forth, each ripple leaving the ground blackened and lifeless. The armies of Mordor, sensing their master's resurgent power, rallied from every corner of the dark land, their ranks swelling with each passing moment. At the forefront rode the Witch King, now Sauron's mightiest servant and the embodiment of his will. Though he no longer bore the ring, the Witch King's power had grown immensely, fueled by Sauron's resurgent might. His very presence seemed to dim the light around him, a walking shadow of his master's malevolence. The skies darkened as vast flocks of fell beasts took wing, the other 8 Nazgûl mounted upon them, ready to carry Sauron's dominion to the farthest reaches of the world. Their piercing cries filled the air, a terrible chorus heralding the dawn of a new dark age. Above it all, the lidless eye of Sauron blazed atop Barad-dûr, its gaze sweeping across Middle-earth, its very presence a palpable force of dread and despair. The realms of men fell first, their defences crumbling before Sauron's overwhelming might. Minas Tirith, the White City, became a black fortress, its walls stained with the blood of those who dared resist. The fields of Pelennor, once green and fertile, became a blasted wasteland. Rohan's plains, home of the Horse Lords, were trampled under the feet of Sauron's endless hordes. The grasslands turned to mud and ash. The elves, for all their wisdom and power, could not stand against the full might of the Dark Lord. Rivendell and Lothlorien became shadowed ruins, their once immortal inhabitants fading like mist before the relentless advance of evil. The havens were destroyed, cutting off any hope of escape to the undying lands. Those elves who survived were enslaved, their immortality now a curse, condemning them to an eternity of servitude. The dwarves sealed themselves in their mountain halls, but even the deepest minds offered no refuge from Sauron's reach. One by one, their kingdoms fell, the vast wealth they had accumulated becoming tribute to Sauron's ever-growing empire. The halls of Erebor, reclaimed at such cost, became dungeons for those who had once ruled there. As darkness descended over the land, the last free peoples of Middle-earth looked to the west, hoping against hope for some salvation. But no help came. The Valar remained silent. The way to Valinor closed forever. The age of heroes was over, the time of unity and fellowship long past. Now there was only survival, if even that could be achieved in this new world of shadow. In the Shire, once a haven of peace and simple pleasures, the shadow fell heaviest of all. The green hills turned brown and barren, the once fertile fields choked with weeds and thorns. Bag End, the home of Bilbo and Frodo Baggins, stood empty and forlorn, its round door hanging off its hinges, a symbol of the broken world. The hobbits, those cheerful and resilient folk, found their spirits crushed under Sauron's rule. Their songs fell silent, their feasts became mere memories. The party tree, under which so many celebrations had been held, withered and died, its branches reaching into the perpetually dark sky like gnarled fingers. Across what was once the free world, pockets of resistance tried to form, but they were swiftly and mercilessly crushed. The Rangers of the North, descendants of Númenor, fought a desperate guerrilla war, but one by one they fell to Sauron's forces or worse, were corrupted to his cause. The last vestiges of the old kingdoms of men were swept away, leaving only darkness in their wake. In this new world order, the bearers of the three elven rings, Galadriel, Elrond, and the secret keeper Gandalf, found their powers not just diminished, but turned against them. The rings they had wielded in secret for so long became instruments of torment, now fully under Sauron's domination. Their wisdom and foresight, once a beacon of hope, now served only to deepen their despair as they foresaw the endless ages of darkness to come. Gandalf the White, once the orchestrator of victory against evil, wandered the blighted lands, his mind shattered by the weight of his failure. The great eagle Gwaihir, last of his kind, was bound in chains atop Barad-dûr, a living trophy of Sauron's triumph over the forces of good. From the pinnacle of Barad-dûr, now grown to impossible heights, the eye of Sauron gazed out over his domain. Middle-earth lay broken before Sauron's gaze, its peoples enslaved, its lands corrupted beyond recognition. Forests burned, mountains crumbled, and rivers ran black with pollution and death. The Dark Lord had won, and a new age of darkness had begun, one that promised to last for all eternity. As Sauron's shadow spread across the world, the songs of elves fell silent. The laughter of hobbits was heard no more, and the proud horns of Gondor would never again ring out across the plains. In their place was only the harsh cries of orcs and the clanging of slave chains. As years passed into decades and decades into centuries, the memory of the world that was faded into legend and then into myth. The names of Frodo, Sam, and their companions became cautionary tales, whispered by slaves in the dark of night, stories of those who had tried to challenge the Dark Lord and failed. In the heart of Mount Doom, unnoticed and unmourned, the body of a small hobbit named Frodo Baggins was consumed by the very flames that had forged the ring. With him, the last hope of Middle-earth flickered and died, extinguished as surely as a candle in a storm. His quest, begun with such courage and determination, had ended in failure, sealing the fate of all free peoples. As Frodo's spirit drifted in the void between worlds, the last embers of his consciousness fading, a final bittersweet understanding dawned upon him. The great eagle question, now answered at such terrible cost, had been a misguided pursuit from the start. The journey, with all its hardships and triumphs, had held a significance he'd only now begun to grasp. But the realization came too late. With a last fleeting thought of the Shire and the friends he'd left behind, Frodo's awareness slipped away into the eternal dark. The ring-bearer's tale had ended, not in triumph, but in shadow, and in his wake Middle-earth descended into an age of darkness from which it might never awaken. And so the world turned, shrouded in eternal night, the fires of Mount Doom casting a sickly glow over Sauron's realm. The presence of Sauron permeated the air, his will emanating from the pinnacle of Barad-dûr, where the One Ring hovered, suspended in dark energy, his victory complete and unassailable. The tale of the ring had ended, not with the triumphant return of the king or the sailing of the last ship to the undying lands, but with the endless reign of shadow. And in the depths of that shadow, the world of Middle-earth continued its slow, inexorable descent into darkness, the light of the elder days, now nothing more than a distant, forgotten dream. Epilogue, The Awakening. The darkness receded slowly, like a tide pulling back from the shore. Frodo became aware of a gentle prodding against his side, insistent and rhythmic. The world of shadow and flame that had consumed him began to fade, replaced by a growing sensation of soft grass beneath him and a cool breeze on his face. "Wake up, Frodo, my lad," a familiar voice called, seeming to come from both very far away and startlingly close. "Come now, this is no time for a nap." Frodo's eyes fluttered open, squinting against the sudden brightness. The world around him was a blur of green and gold, so different from the ash and fire he had just been engulfed in that. For a moment he couldn't comprehend what he was seeing. As his vision cleared, he found himself looking up into the face of Gandalf. The wizard's eyes twinkled with a mixture of amusement and concern, his staff still extended where he had been using it to prod Frodo awake. "Gandalf!" Frodo's voice was hoarse, as if he had been screaming. Perhaps he had been. "But how? Where am I?" He sat up abruptly, his head spinning with the sudden movement. Gone was the desolate landscape of Mordor. Instead, he found himself in a sunlit glade, surrounded by trees whose leaves rustled gently in the breeze. It was peaceful, serene. Everything that the world he had just left behind was not. "Why, you're exactly where you were when you dozed off, my dear hobbit," Gandalf replied, his brow furrowing slightly. "Though I must say it is most unlike you to slumber during the day's height, especially in such an exposed spot." Frodo looked around wildly, his mind struggling to reconcile the peaceful scene before him with the vivid horrors he had just experienced. "But the eagles, Mount Doom, Sauron," he stammered, the words tumbling out in a confused jumble. Gandalf's expression shifted from concern to puzzlement. "Eagles, Mount Doom! Frodo, what are you talking about?" "The quest, Gandalf. We took the eagles to Mount Doom, but everything went wrong. Sam—" Frodo's voice broke as the memory of his friend's sacrifice washed over him anew. Sam died, and Sauron won. The world fell into darkness. The wizard's eyes widened in understanding, and he laid a comforting hand on Frodo's shoulder. "Ah, I see. It seems you've had quite a vivid dream, my friend, but I can assure you it was just that. A dream." Frodo shook his head, still unable to fully accept this sudden shift in reality. A dream, but it felt so real, the heat, the pain, the loss. How can it all have been just a dream? Gandalf settled himself on the grass beside Frodo, his long beard brushing the ground. Dreams oft seem as real as waking life, especially those born of our deepest fears and regrets. But look around you, Frodo. Feel the grass beneath your fingers, the breeze on your face. This is real. You are safe. As if to emphasize Gandalf's words, a butterfly fluttered past, its delicate wings catching the sunlight. The simple beauty of it brought tears to Frodo's eyes. After the horrors he had witnessed, dreamed, such a small, perfect thing seemed almost miraculous. "But what day is it?" Frodo asked, still struggling to orient himself. "For how long have I lain in slumber?" Gandalf chuckled softly. "It's been about an hour since I arrived to find you napping here. As for the date, it's been 3 years since you returned from your quest. 3 years since you cast the ring into the fires of Mount Doom and saved all of Middle-earth." The words hit Frodo like a physical blow. 3 years. 3 years of peace, of healing, of life continuing on. Not the eternal darkness he had just lived through, but a world saved, a future secured. Then, "We did it?" Frodo asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "We really destroyed the ring?" "Indeed you did," Gandalf confirmed, his voice warm with pride. "You and Sam made the long journey on foot, facing countless perils, and in the end you succeeded where all others would have failed. Sauron was defeated, his power broken forever." Relief washed over Frodo in a great wave, leaving him feeling weak and shaky. He had done it, or rather, he and Sam had done it, together. The world was safe, the shadow had been vanquished. The vivid nightmare of failure and darkness began to recede, like mist burned away by the morning sun. As Frodo's mind cleared, a new question formed. "Gandalf," he began hesitantly, "in my dream, we tried to take the eagles directly to Mount Doom. It appeared so straightforward, so clear to the mind's eye. Why didn't we do that in reality? Why make the long journey on foot when we could have flown?" Gandalf's eyes twinkled with that familiar mix of wisdom and mischief. "Ah, now that is an interesting question, isn't it? One that many have asked, I'm sure. But perhaps the answer lies not in strategy or logistics, but in the nature of the quest itself." As if in response to Gandalf's words, a deep, rumbling voice spoke from behind them. "Indeed, young hobbit, the answer you seek is one of great importance." Frodo turned to find himself face to face with an Ent, its ancient eyes filled with the wisdom of countless ages. It was the same Ent from his dream, the one who had posed the question that had started it all. "You," Frodo breathed, a mix of awe and trepidation in his voice. "You were in my dream." The Ent nodded slowly, the movement like the creaking of old branches in the wind. Dreams often carry truths that our waking minds struggle to grasp. "You have seen one possible path, young Frodo, a path of haste and seeming simplicity that led to ruin." "But why?" Frodo asked, his curiosity overcoming his lingering fear. "Why wouldn't using the eagles have worked?" The Ent's eyes seemed to look not just at Frodo, but through him, seeing beyond the confines of time and space. "The journey you undertook was not merely about reaching a destination, but about the transformation that occurred along the way. It was about the bonds forged, the allies gathered, the strength discovered within yourselves." Gandalf nodded in agreement. "The Ent speaks truly, Frodo. Had you simply flown to Mount Doom, you would have arrived as you began, a small hobbit facing an impossible task. But by making the journey on foot, you arrived as something more. You had grown, learned, suffered, and triumphed. You had become someone capable of resisting the ring's power at the very brink of its destruction." The Ent continued, its voice like the slow grinding of stone. "Moreover, your journey united the peoples of Middle-earth against a common foe. Alliances were formed, old grudges set aside. This unity was as crucial to victory as the destruction of the ring itself." Frodo considered this, remembering the friendships formed and the allies gathered during their long quest. He thought of the Council of Elrond, of the Fellowship, of the armies that had stood against Sauron's forces. None of that would have happened if they had simply flown to Mount Doom. "I understand," Frodo said slowly. "The path itself was of utmost necessity, not just to get to Mount Doom, but to become who we needed to be to succeed." "Precisely," Gandalf said with a smile. "The eagles, noble and powerful as they are, could not have borne you past your own weaknesses or the ring's temptations. Those were battles that had to be fought step by step, day by day, through hardship and triumph alike." The Ent nodded solemnly. "Let this wisdom be etched upon your heart, young hobbit. In life, as in quests, it is often not the destination that matters most, but the journey taken to reach it, the challenges faced, the growth achieved, the bonds forged. These are the true treasures, more valuable than any ring of power." As the Ent's words faded, so too did its form, dissolving like mist in the morning sun. Frodo blinked, unsure if the ancient tree-herder had truly been there, or if it had been another dream. Gandalf, seeming to sense Frodo's confusion, placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "The wisdom of the Ents is often as elusive as it is profound, but the truth of its words remains, dream or no." Frodo's mind drifted to his friends, their fates in his nightmare still vivid and painful, but here, in this peaceful reality, how different things were. Sam had returned to the Shire a hero, married his beloved Rosie, and was now tending to the most beautiful gardens in all of Hobbiton. Merry and Pippin, changed by their adventures but not diminished, had grown into respected leaders among the hobbits, their courage and cheer an inspiration to all. The contrast between the dark future he had dreamed and the bright reality before him was stark, a testament to the true power of their shared journey. Frodo nodded, feeling a sense of peace settle over him. The nightmare of failure and darkness had faded, replaced by a deeper understanding of the journey he had undertaken and the victory they had achieved. "Thank you, Gandalf," he said softly, "for rousing me from my slumber, and for all you have done." The wizard's eyes twinkled. "You're most welcome, my dear Frodo. Now what do you say we head back to Bag End? I believe Sam mentioned something about tea when I passed by earlier." As they stood and began to walk through the sun-dappled glade, Frodo felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over him. Gratitude for the quest completed, for the world saved, for the friends who had stood by him through it all. But most of all, gratitude for the journey itself, with all its hardships and triumphs. As they continued their walk, Frodo marveled at the vibrant beauty of the Shire around them. The fields were lush and green, dotted with wildflowers in a riot of colours. The air was filled with the sound of bees buzzing and birds singing, a far cry from the oppressive silence of his nightmare. Hobbits worked in their gardens or strolled along the paths, their faces bright with contentment. The Shire had not just survived, but thrived in the years since the Ring's destruction, its natural bounty seeming to celebrate the hard-won peace. The contrast with the blighted, shadowed land of Frodo's dream could not have been more stark, and he felt a renewed surge of gratitude for the journey that had preserved this idyllic haven. For in that journey he had found not just the strength to save Middle-earth, but the wisdom to appreciate the peace that followed. And as they crested a hill, the familiar round door of Bag End coming into view, Frodo knew that this simple, beautiful life was the true reward for all they had endured. The riddle of the great eagles had at last been unravelled, not with logic or strategy, but with the wisdom born of hardship and fellowship. In the crucible of their journey, Frodo and his companions had forged bonds stronger than Mithril, faced fears deeper than the mines of Moria, and discovered courage that even the mightiest of eagles could admire. They had learned that the truest path to victory lay not in avoiding challenges, but in facing them step by step, side by side. As Frodo gazed at his friends, their faces etched with the story of their impossible quest, he understood at last. The eagles could have carried them over mountains and through storms, but they could never have carried them past their own doubts and fears. It was the journey itself, every painful step, every moment of despair overcome, every small kindness and sacrifice that had truly defeated the darkness. In the end, they had saved Middle-earth not just from Sauron, but from the shadows within themselves. And that, Frodo realized, was a victory no shortcut could have ever achieved. This has been a Yo Brian Books production of We Took the Eagles. I hope you enjoyed it. For more stories from Yo Brian Books, please subscribe now. Share this video if you liked it. See you next time.